Okay. So for people who've been watching my streams on here, I made a post on Facebook. I've been doing micro ramblings of an insane man on Facebook, like 10-minute long clips off my phone. And so I ran out of stuff currently to ramble about that wasn't really personal. So I made a post or a poll. Uh, Dungeons and Dragons was one option, and then story time, your choice, in parentheses, was the other. Everybody voted for Dungeons and Dragons, so I've made one video and posted it already. Like I think it was Friday or Saturday, like early ass for Saturday morning, because like a 20-minute video was like almost 2 gigs on my phone. So I tried doing a second video like an hour ago, and that one was like 2.8 gigs, and it just wouldn't load or process on my Facebook. So I said, fuck it. So I've scrapped part two of that, and I will regale everybody who has not heard of this tale or the full details of said tale in this video, and I will probably condense it. And if I have to do a part two, I will make a part two. So, uh, as I stated in the video on Facebook, I kind of shot myself in the foot with that topic for the poll because just saying Dungeons and Dragons is incredibly vague. So like, I don't have it was just it's just a generalized topic. So I thought, all right, well, I'll talk about Dungeons and Dragons and what's so good about it, and I'll talk about things that like the awesome, really interesting aspects of Dungeons and Dragons from a campaign I played in, which is the first campaign I played in. And it'll also explain how me and a handful of my friends got into the Dungeons and Dragons and how we played and how we learned and matured as players throughout that campaign. So, uh, I'll go into because I went into some fucking detail with this, and it's cringy. But everybody here on YouTube knows I'm a massive Tolkien nerd and a fucking fantasy junkie. Anything fantasy related, love it. I was worse, if not like I was like Super Saiyan 3 nerdy compared to what I am now when it came to that. Like, I was digesting every fucking thing I possibly could. And the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out at the time. So I asked my grandfather for Christmas for a Dungeons and Dragons set because I didn't know how Dungeons and Dragons worked. And so he got me 2 boxes. He got me the 3.5 basic set, which is a black box with some of the generic stock characters that D&D has or Wizards of the Coast had at the time, fighting a black dragon. And it came with the little war figure, like uh, uh, tabletop warfare miniatures, so you could move them on the 9 double-sided boards you had for the map, and it was basically just 18 generic dungeon tiles with like maybe a skeleton here or some mushrooms in this corner and the fucking hoard of gold there and so on and so forth. And very generic, very bare bones, had a very bare bones starter set, dungeon master guide and player's guide fucking pamphlets. Came with a set of dice and 4 character sheets that were already pre-rolled with starting equipment, and you could write on it then, or you could photocopy it and then write down what you want. And that was it. The second box I got was, and it's still one of my prized possessions, is a TSR Silver Edition of Dungeons and Dragons, second edition, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, because it had Thaco to hit armor class 0. And for those who play Dungeons and Dragons, you'll know in third edition and beyond, past third edition, it's the higher your AC, the better your AC. So if you have a 13 in AC, you have to roll a 13 or higher to hit that person. Not with Thaco. The higher your AC, the shittier your AC. The lower it is, the better. And the numbers will go into the negatives. And so you have like 13 or 14-year-old me with these two fucking box sets. And the TSRD one doesn't come with pieces. It came with a bag of dice. It came with a Dungeon Master screen, which is the town of Haven. It came with 9 character sheets, all pre-made, all second level, and they covered every fucking class under the book except for Barbarian, Druid, and I think that's it. Oh, Barbarian, Druid, Bard, and Monk. Those are the only 4 classes that weren't in the TSRD box. Everything else, and they even had a 1 or 2 multi-class characters. So you kind of get the gist of the concepts. And it also had I'd say 30 or 40 pages more for the Dungeon Master's Guide, because it showed you how to make dungeons, how to roll up random loot. It had stuff on the Dungeon Master's screen in the back where it showed the map of like the whole region, like points of interest, and this is random loot that's not in the 3 adventures written out in the book, the adventure manual, but these things can be in your game when you're exploring these other points of interest. So I got a little bit of both. I got I took I understood the crunch of 3.5, and I had the very startings of, okay, so this is a role-playing game and all that. Still didn't know what the fuck we were doing. Tried showing it to my friends, and they were really interested because they're all massive nerds as well, but we couldn't do anything until our friend Matt had told us that his older brother, who was in high school at this point, he was a Dungeons and Dragons dungeon master for his friends, and he'd be more than willing to let us play. So we were like, awesome. Now we were in 8th grade, ass end of 8th grade, probably 2-3 months before we left middle school, and we had games club, and we could stay after school if we wanted to. So the high school was just probably a 2-3 minute walk away. It was right in front of the middle school, and Matt's brother would get out early, and so he would come to the middle school and he would host the games. And we all sat down one session, and he told us, okay, well, he started showing us all the rules, and he divided us up. And so he divided us up into varying groups. I would play Mondays. My friend Barry would play Tuesdays. My friends Will and Eric, because they made their characters and they were best buddies. They were a dwarf. Will was a dwarven fighter, and Eric was a halfling rogue, and both of them were just partners in crime in the story. So they played Wednesdays, and then it was Thursdays. Jared, the paladin, and Mitch, the cleric, were part of a holy order, and so they played on Thursdays. And then Fridays, because of how things worked out, Jess, who would play a druid, played on Fridays. And then when Matt finally joined up, because he was a year or so younger than me, so he had to go. He just couldn't stay after that long. But when he finally joined in, he joined in with us, and he would play after school with his brother after his brother got back. And Matt's brother was cool, and he'd drive us home after the session. And so that's how it started. We started playing in middle school, and then when all of us graduated and moved over to the high school, we started playing after school with him, and we all carpooled with him. Or if some of our parents picked us up. But yeah, so that was it. We also had an unsung rule that was kind of enforced by Matt's brother, the dungeon master, which was don't tell anybody what happened in your session unless they were with you. Because he was trying to instill this role, like it's role playing, and he was very role play heavy. And he's like, you wouldn't know, like it when you make friends, you don't instantly know everything about the person you're going to become friends with right then and there. Like if like for instance, say me and Belgian Dan just met up in person and we'd never talked to each other. Like it'd be a little jarring if I was like, "Oh, Dan, yes, you're 30, like you're 31 years old, and your favorite beer, your favorite beverage is Jack Daniels, and you love reading Clifford the Big Red Dog." It'd be like, wait, how do you know about like how do you know all of this? Like what? Like everybody would think it's kind of weird and creepy that you're like that. I know everything about Dan, and so he's like that's you're playing as characters, so you might know like what's going on outside of the game, but inside of the game, your characters don't know unless they're informed or they explain something. So he did that. Also, Heroes was out at the time, and so that's why he split up the party the way he did. He wanted to do something a la Heroes, the first season of Heroes, where all the main cast slowly started to congregate into one cohesive group, which is probably one of the coolest concepts that I've yet to really see implemented again in a game. And so that's what happened. Now, all that aside, because I had to get all the fucking backstory and recap everything that happened in my first video. My first video also talks about my well, I made two videos thus far. One is the full on retelling of what happened in the campaign. The other one was just all of this. So on to the story, the saga. So it was Monday, and it was my character. My character was Surian Findicano. I took two great elven Noldor lords from the Silmarillion, and I mashed them together because Fingon is a badass. God, I'm a nerd. And I was a ranger, and I was a human ranger. Now Matt's brother went, no, like so you're a human ranger, and oh, okay, well at least your stats are all set, and he's helping me make my character sheet and finalize it. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, you are the heir to the throne of the kingdoms to the south. And I'm like, I am. He's like, yes. Also, you're half elven, so you're not human. I'm like, do I get any like what's half elven mean? I'm like, I don't know like what? What do you mean like I'm a half elf? He's like, well, your father is half elven because his father is an elf, and your mother is a full-blooded elf, and she's of noble blood, and your father is of noble blood, and your mother is half gray elf and half war elf. Now, he had gray elves, which are like the very Tolkien-esque elves, and then the war elves are more like Klingons, as I explained in the video on Facebook. They're very warlike. very martial prowess of warrior culture sort of thing. But they also have like a very elven culture to themselves. But they are incredibly fucking fierce in defending their borders, and they are isolationist as fuck. He's like, so you are heir to you are, and also the Gray Elves have a tribunal. There's three kingdoms that are ruled by the ruling houses and lords, and each one makes the tribunal, and they delegate the matters. And so he's like, your character is the heir to one of the houses of the tribunal. You're also in line for a large part of territory for the war elves, and you're also heir by your father's blood to the southern kingdoms. Also, because of your father's lineage, you're also heir to the middle kingdoms because of your ancient bloodline, which is the line of Ulrich and then the line of Osric, which is my kinsman. And I'm like, all right, that's fine. Like, that sounds cool. I'm like, I'm still gonna be a ranger. He's like, yep, you're still a ranger. Like, you like your care. Like, how do you want to work with this? And I'm like, well, why? Like, what's going on in the campaign? Like, what's the storyline? Because he had only told us just a little bit. And what he had told us is there's a great war going on where the gods are walking among mortals and fighting a lot of like fighting against each other. Like this is a not even it's a near Ragnarok event happening. And the Southern Kingdoms, my family's line was forced exiled and forced out of their homelands trying to defend against the forces of evil. And so they've been in exile, and they've been constantly moving across the continent trying to stay ahead of the game. And my character, which I chose, was I want to stay with the war elves. Like, he's like, all right, well, why would you stay with the war elves? And I'm like, oh, my father's a famous war like general, right? He's like, yeah, he's one of the leaders. I'm like, oh, well, he got attacked in a battle, and he tried retreating, and like they found out where like he was hiding out, and I was hiding, and that's where me and my mother were staying. And so he had to bring me there, and my my mother's my mother's family took me as a fosterling. He's like, all right, sounds good. Now, why are you a ranger? And I'm like, uh, I'm helping. I learned how to fight because of my lineage. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, and defending the borders because the war elves don't like anyone going into their lands. He's like, all right, that sounds good. And he's like, now, how old were you when you became a fosterling? I was like, oh, I must have been like a toddler or a small child. I've been raised in I've been raised in the arts of war and being a ranger since I became of age. He's like, all right. How old's your character now though? And I didn't write down an age. So I just picked like a generic age, and I was like, I'm 26. He's like, yeah, but you're a half elf though. I'm like, well, what's a 26-year-old in a half elf's lifespan? He's like, I'll say you're 21. No, it's 71. You're around, you're in your late 60s, early 70s, but you're in the prime of your life right now. I'm like, oh, awesome. Okay. And he's like, all right, now you've become of age, you have renown, and your father, and your grandfather, your elven grandfather, Basden Eagle Eye, because I was allowed to name him, Basden Eagle Eye. You have been tasked to march forth into the Middle Kingdoms because your father has gotten word from one of your kinsmen that their city is being besieged, and he's calling for all bannermen to help him. And he's requested that your father personally help lead the charge because of how closely related they are. I'm like, all right. And so he's like, well, what does your father look like, and what does your grandfather look like? And I immediately said, my father looks like Ben Orr of the Cars, the bassist, and my grandfather looks like David Bowie. I didn't even hesitate. He's like, okay. I'm like, yeah, Ben Orr and David Bowie. He's like, all right, well, you, Ben Orr, and David Bowie are leading an army of a few thousand men. And where do you go from here? And so I chose one of the major mountain passes, which is called Cold Pass. And as we were going through Cold Pass, we started seeing dwarven refugees. And the basically the enemy had been besieging these regions of the passages because of the resources, mines, or reserves. It's one of the major trading routes over the mountains, and so we went on a crusade to wipe out and push back the warbands and raiders. And when we did that, I left about 1,000 men to guard the passage. And so I had about half of my forces were elves, and half of my forces were men loyal to my father. And so I left a few elves and a few men, and we started just mounting our forces and moving forwards down the mountains. And as we started going into the western fringe of the Middle Kingdoms, we started seeing more ruins, burning farmlands, just burning, villages completely ransacked and destroyed, refugees slowly moving to and fro along the roads and across the fields, trying to escape the war that was going on. And finally, we started hearing reports from these refugees that we were talking to, that there was 3 large war bands that had been roaming around for the past fortnight, and they had just been laying waste to these outlying areas because there's nobody defending them. Because most of the forces are in Prewa, which is the great stronghold fortress city that's in the western fringe, which is where we're going. And so I was like, fuck this. We're going to take out these war bands. And so we started tracking them as best we could. And I sent out groups of scouts. Now, as we were marching through and following one of our leads, we found around 600 of these warriors, these like of the enemy, across this river. Now, this river bisects with another, so it forms 4 rivers in a shape of an X. You have one from the north, or the northeast, and it cuts down and goes southwest. And then you have one coming in from the northwest, and it goes down the southeast. And each river is differently named, and they change because of this bisection. And it's also through a very craggy highland area. So we've got massive rocky cliffs, and it's like the river kind of just cut itself into like a canyon like shape on these very mountainous areas, but it's not too mountainous. It's just like a very rocky hill area. And we saw them about, I'd say, 10 miles before we set up camp, and I was like, send out about 2 to 3,000 men and have them go across the river and wrap around so they can hit them from the other side. And so the DM's like, well, why are you sending out like almost 3 times if not 3 times the force? And I'm like, they probably have, like, from what the reports have said and what my men have been telling me in the camp, they have more likely than not ogres and trolls and wargs. They're probably heavily armored hobgoblins. They probably have orcs, which are cannon fodder. they have a lot of monstrous things, and sending in like 1,000 men against that, I don't have orcs and trolls and wargs and shit like that. All I have are men and elves armed in like the most basic of equipment, with the majority of them on horseback. And I need all the horses I can, so I need to have them on foot. So the best thing I can do is send out one of my trusted captains and have him lead the charge. So he's like, okay, what are you going to do in the meantime? I'm like, I'm going to set up camp right next to this, to the southwest river, because it's the deepest of the rivers, and there's no way they'll be able to get us from our rear flank. And if they try to come at us they can only get us from the northwest, the west, or the southwest. Not going to be able to get us from any other side, because the other sides are wrapped around by the very craggy hill-like structures and the river itself. Like, the rivers have made natural boundaries alongside these cliffs. He's like, okay. And shit starts to go downhill fast. Like 2 days later, we haven't heard from this force. It shouldn't have taken him 2 days. And finally, we start hearing war horns, but they're not our war horns. And we see this rabble of lightly armored infantry sprinting towards us. And I order my men to set up spikes and all the pikemen to prepare for a charge, because there might be cavalry coming. And then I order my javelin throwers, spear throwers, and archers to loose on the charging enemy, because it's basically a death charge. They're going to try and smash through our lines, and this is what I told the DM. Like, they're going to try and smash through our lines and cause a rout. They're going to try and divide us and corner us. So I'm going to try and fucking cause as much damage before they get here. And so my whole fucking army just starts doing this. Like, all my ranged warriors start doing this, and they did a lot of damage to them. Come to find out, the enemy had used spells and basically caused my men to go insane, like the surviving stragglers. And so, in a fit of madness, they were screaming and hollering and waving their swords. And since they were so far away we couldn't hear them, they were telling us, like, the few that could resist were trying to tell us, don't fire on us. And I fired on them. And so I killed innocent men of my cause. And then came the actual enemy. Apparently, the 600 men that I had seen was just a small piece of bait. And I stupidly and naively bit onto that hook, line, and fucking sinker. And their whole force had marshaled. They were basically following us, because I'm following like military like maneuvers by the book. These guys are specialists in guerrilla tactics. Like, they are using the land and everything. And since I don't know the land and I've never been in this part of the region, I wouldn't know. And so they were following us, and basically they had set up all their positions ready to fucking attack us, and they hit us like a goddamn fucking wave. And they just smashed through the lines, and they cut us off into three small companies. Mine, Ben Orr's, and David Bowie's. And so they basically, like, I lost sight of my father and grandfather while they were fighting, and I ordered a retreat backwards. And so I was just pushing, like, my men and I were fucking backing up as far as we could. trying to thin out their ranks, and it wasn't happening. Like they outnumbered us, and we were outgunned because their guys were heavily equipped and very fucking experienced. And so I backed up right to the fucking edges of these cliffs that we had set up camp next to. And the DM's just like, as you're, because I was one of the few men mounted still. He's like, you have a higher vantage point than the rest of your men at arms and foot soldiers, and you just see the sheer carnage of this fight. Like, it like this. You have been routed and you have been beaten. Like, you can barely see the banners of your kinsmen below you, and you can see a few of your men are actually actively trying to swim this river and drowning. That's how terrified and like demoralized they are. What do you do? And I was like, I turn to one of my captains, and I order them to sound a charge. And he's like, wait, what? I'm like, if I'm going out in a death charge so that we will be remembered. Like, we're not going down without a fight. And so he's like, all right, roll me a reflex save. And I'm like, what? He's like, roll me a reflex save. I'm like, okay. So I roll a reflex save, and I fuck it bad. Like, I got a shit fucking roll. And he's like, all right. Yeah, okay. And he's trying. And I like, no, looking back on it now as a DM, I know what he was doing. He had rolled a bunch of attacks because I was, again, one of the few men mounted. I'm dressed in full regalia, showing my status and my rank among the army. A bunch of the enemy archers spotted me, and they just fired a volley towards me to kill me. And because of my reflex save being so shit, I'm probably going to be hit by a dozen fucking arrows and become a pincushion. And he's kind of like, no, I don't want to kill him. Like, I can't kill him. This is his first session. This is his first actual game of D&D. This is kind of okay. So he finally says, all right, as you sound this charge, and just as the horns are blowing to rally the men into formation, you are struck 3 times by arrows. 2 in the shoulder, and 1 hits you in the chest, and it collapses your lung. The others hit your horse, and it throws you back off the cliff, and you plunge into the river. And I'm like, what? I'm dead? And he's like, you'll have to find out next session. I'll see you on Monday. And so, like, for the whole week, I'm sitting there fucking worried, like, oh, fuck, man, I'm dead. Man, I'm dead. And I'm starting to fucking overthink and overanalyze, like, where did I go wrong with my strat? Like, oh my god, I should have moved my men here, or oh, I should have set up more sentries for night watches, and fuck. And so the next Monday comes, and I come in, and I'm sitting down, and he's like, "Did you bring your character sheet?" I'm like, "Yes, I brought my character sheet." He's like, "All right, you wake up." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "You wake up in a bed." And then he turned around, because it was in the library. He turned around and he waved over to one of the tables that I couldn't see because of a bookshelf. And my friend Barry walks over, and he sits down, and he opens up his backpack, and he pulls out his character sheet. He's like, "You see Thaddeus Stormwind looking over you." And Barry described what his character looked like. And now Barry's character, it was stuck with with an old wizard hermit. And this wizard had multiple apprentices, and he had seen he'd been around the block a while. Like, I think from what if I remember correctly, the old man's name is Algero. Now, Algero is a couple centuries old, and now this war has been going on for centuries, and it's only broken out into like a full scale, like really fucking like physical visual war. Before this, it was border skirmishes here and there. Nobody knew why. And then it just became a full out just torrent of like the dark gods and their minions. And he had watched his apprentices leave him because of the call and sense of duty they had to their fellow man. And they've either fallen to corruption, or they've been brutally killed, or they've not been able to withstand the might of magic, and they've destroyed themselves trying to like either defeat an army or defeat a powerful foe, or to save somebody, what have you. And when he found Barry's character Thaddeus, who and Barry's character is an orphan, he took him in under his wing about a decade and a half ago, and he's been raising him to become he's going to pass the torch on to himself. Like, he's going to on his knowledge and pass the torch off so that Barry will teach the next generation, because his time has finally come to pass on. And Barry told me later on after that session that most of his first session was arguing philosophically with his mentor, because Barry's character is kind of he's got a wanderlust, and he has a sense of adventure and a sense of duty and purpose, and he's in a small little village, about 20 leagues away from where my battle was. And refugees and wounded soldiers from previous battles have wandered through town asking for whatever they can, like water, just a scrap of food, some shelter for the night, so on and so forth. And when Barry's not spending time studying his tomes and practicing and following the tutelage of Algero, he sneaks out at night and he goes to the tavern and he talks to the people and tries to socialize. And so he's seeing these horrors, and he feels like he can do something about it. And so that's where I come in. And so I wake up, and that Barry's looking over me. He's like, "Easy now. You've still got to feel like we've managed to take out some of the arrowheads in your chest and your shoulders, but there's a few shards here and there that broke off while we were trying to get them out. And we went to the apothecary, and the apothecary and will come back, and he's going to try and heal you up." And I'm completely dumbfounded, like both in character and out of character. And Barry thinks I'm acting in character when I'm like, "Wait, what? Who? Who are you? Where am I? How did I get here?" And Barry's in character. He's like, "Well, I was walking along the riverside collecting roots and just herbs that grow along that side of the river, and I saw you you had washed up. I don't know how long you were there, but you were festering. So I ran back here to the hut, and I told my master, and my master called for the apothecary, like the healers at the apothecary, to come, and they scooped you up and they brought you here." And I'm like, "Oh, well, thank you." And Barry's character is very fucking curious because he's a shut-in, and and that's the thing about Barry's character and just Barry himself. He hungers for knowledge. He needs to know everything. And when Algero told him, like, "Yeah, like, I'm training you to become like the next master of my order," Barry just digested as much as he could the entire week. All like he was asking Matt's brother, like the DM, like, well, like, how does magic work? How does this work? What's up with this? What kind of history would like Algiro teach me, and what's in his tomes? So he knows he knows the history of this campaign setting, and he has now become the encyclopedic knowledge of this campaign setting. But he has no social like knowledge. Like he is a socially awkward person. And so he's basically interrogating me at my bedside, like, like this chainmail don't look like normal chainmail. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, it has to be dwarven make. And then he's grabbing because my chainmail's still on me for some reason, and he takes it off my bed because it was sitting there, and he takes it off and he's inspecting it in the sunlight coming through the window. He's like, no, actually no, because the dwarves rivet them. These look welded, or I don't know how to explain it, but it's not what the people of the Middle Kingdoms do. So it has to be either dwarven make, and it's really really well crafted dwarven make, or it's elven make. And I'm like, it's just a hauberk of mail I was given. I'm a soldier, and the DM had told me, don't tell anybody who you are. Like the enemy is trying to wipe out you are the last heir to this line. Like if you die, your father may still be able to carry on the lineage, but your father wants you to. Like you and your father are the last of this line. Once you two die, like that line is dead. And like the Southern Kingdoms will never have a king again like that. And plus you're one of the oldest surviving lineages. And so I'm trying my damnedest to fucking roll fucking skill checks to try and fucking get Barry off my fucking ass with this interrogation of his, and it's not working. Like, yeah, like but why would you get such a high quality like shirt of mail? It makes no sense. Like, see, look at like all the brass rings here around the trim, and the gold, and there's a little bit of silver leafing. Like this definitely has to be elven made. Like this has to be elven crafted mail. There's no denying it. I would know. There's a few tomes here that have talked about the crafts, like the skills, like the skilled craftsmen of the elves. Are you of the gray or of the war elves? And I was like, I lift my hair above my like over my ear, and he's like, oh, so you are a human. Well, how would you get such exquisite mail? And then look at your sword, and then he pulls out my sword out of the scabbard. He's like, there's elven runes along the fuller, and there's all these intricate details. Like this is worthy of a king. And I'm like, oh fuck. And he's like, wait a minute. So what those soldiers told me must be true. And I'm like, what soldiers? He's like, well, the other day, while you were still resting and still in a coma, I snuck into town. Don't tell old man Algiro, he'll fucking kill me. But I snuck out of town. I snuck out of here last night, but the night before, and when I was at the tavern, a couple wounded soldiers came, and they said they were caught in a battle and they were routed. And their leader, their general, was shot in the chest with 3 arrows, and he fell off his horse off onto a cliff and went down a river. Guess who I found at the river with 3 arrows in their chest? You're him. You have to be him. And I'm like, oh, fuck. He's like, so what's your name? I have to know your name. Like, what was the battle like? Like, what did you see? Like, were there trolls? Were there ogres? Were there any of those weird men in black plate mail with flaming eyes? Is this sword magical? And he's just getting he's just getting a little too creepy for my taste, and I'm like, yes, yes, I was in that battle. I was in that battle alongside my father and grandfather and my kinsmen, and we were making our way towards Prewa to lift the siege because my kinsmen have been calling out for all bannermen to help them. He's like, oh my god. And he starts looking around and he's grabbing all his fucking books, and Barry's like, I'm looking through all my notes. Like, he has a fucking notebook on the table. And I'm like, what are you looking for? He's like, wait a minute. There's something here that like, now that you're saying this, you said something about it, like a grandfather and a father. And he starts looking. And then he's like, I look at his belt. I look at his belt, his hauberk, his helmet, and his sword and dagger. I look at everything that was still on him when I found him at the river. And finally he saw that there was a brooch, or a brooch on my belt, and he's looking through all the symbols that he'd because Matt's brother was telling him, like, yep, this is what this symbol means, and this is what this house has, and what their regalia is. So he's looking, and he's like, right here, and he points, and the symbol is a Norse dragon knot, but it's a picture of a Norse dragon fighting a swan, and they're both locked in combat, and it's a very, very Nordic design. And he's like, that's one of the houses of the Mirren Tribunal, and you have one, and only people of that, only elves of that noble house have that. Oh my god. And then now Barry's putting two and two together, and he has completely solved me. Like, he has completely read me like a fucking book. Because my character just sucked at being fucking cautious and averting, suspicion. And so Barry finds out my heritage and my lineage, and again, this is going to be a little side tangent. I fucking despise that most DMs and most Dungeons and Dragons modules do not use the skill knowledge nobility or knowledge history. Those are like two really wasted skills that aren't really used, but they have so much lore, character development, and character flavor to them. Like, who's to say that there isn't somebody in the party that knows this kind of stuff? Like, there's people here that know all about the Kardashians, going all the way back to when Bruce Jenner was in the Olympics and stuff as an athlete. That's knowledge history. And if you want to say knowledge nobility, I guess, because it follows a lineage, like presidencies, like the Kennedys. I know, like, I live here in New England, so I know about the Kennedys, like the Kennedy family. There's people that probably know a lot about the Roosevelt family and the fucking Bush family and all. Like, we have families like that date back. Like, who's to, like, why is knowledge history and knowledge nobility not a really good, useful thing for certain characters? And only a few classes get them, which is kind of a waste. But anyways, back to the story. Barry used knowledge nobility and knowledge history to read me like a book, and now he knows my character's backstory. And he knows that the army I was leading with Ben Orr and David Bowie have been routed. And I'm like, and I'm now sitting, and he's telling me, like, easy now, like the healers aren't here yet. You might fucking like ruin your shoulder or collapse your lung again. And I'm just sitting there holding my head in my hands because it's like, fuck, that's right. My father, like, Ben Orr and David Bowie are dead because of me. Oh God. Like, I'm having survivor's guilt. And he's like, well, there's some good news. There's some good news I can tell you. I'm like, what is it? And I'm like, I get up and I grab him by the scruff of his shirt, like tunic. I'm like, what is it? What news do you have? And he's like, some of the survivors told me that your father and grandfather are still alive. And they're going to the Miran Forest to talk to the Grey Elves. And I'm like, how the fuck do you know this? How do they know this? Because they led 2 charges and they pushed through. That's all I know. Like, please don't hurt me, strong warrior. Please don't. Like, I'm yeah. That's all I know. And I'm like, fuck. Well, at least Ben Orr and David Bowie are alive, but who knows how to define alive? Like, my father could have his jaw missing because an orc fucking used a warhammer on his face, or he's missing 2 legs. He's deathly ill from like fever or infection because of arrows, or like he's bleeding out. And I just was like, I need a horse and I need supplies. And he's like, no, 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 no. Like, doctor's orders told me to keep you here in this bed. And I'm like hell you are. And I start grabbing my hauberk and I'm putting it on, and I'm grabbing my helmet and putting my belt on with my scabbard and putting my sword back into like sheathing my sword, and I'm fucking grabbing everything that's left of my character. And as soon as I turn around, he's like, sleep, and immediately knocks my ass out. And then he just in game time, it took him like a half hour to get me like back into bed because Barry's wizard was incredibly weak physically. And plus he's like, I don't fucking know how to take chainmail off and all this. Like Algier, like the apothecarians did all this shit, and he's trying to lift my character fully clad in armor and weapons back onto the cot. And the healers came. They healed. They mended that. They pulled out the rest of the shrapnel from the arrowheads, but there were a few pieces still stuck in there. And when I finally came to after the sleep spell had passed, they told me, "Listen, we've stitched you up best we could. We've put a few salves on your wounds to keep them from getting infected. But there's a few pieces of shards that we just can't get because we don't want to risk fucking up your shoulder. They'll come out on their own because of all the the medication we put on there, the herbs. They'll come out slowly, not painfully, but slowly. So don't don't overexert your arm because you'll ruin your arm or your shoulder. Also, here's like a week's worth of medication, which was like willow bark extract and basically homeopathic aspirin or painkillers and disinfectants. And then they gave me as many cloth bandages as they could that would last me about a week. And they're like, remember, rinse the wound. If it gets really infected, you might have to use a piece of hot metal to burn the infection off. And I'm like, well, I'm not staying here. And they're like, listen, you don't understand. You've been suffering from a fever because of the infection. You were on that riverbed for a few days. Like, you were suffering from a rot. Like, you can't leave. And I'm like, I have to leave because my father and grandfather, Ben Orr and David Bowie, think I'm dead probably. And I don't know if they're going to be dead when I arrive or not. And I don't know when I'll be able to see them. I need to see them now to let them know, hey, I'm still alive. I'm not a prisoner. I haven't been captured. I haven't died. Like, I've got to go. And they're like, well, if it's that important to you, then we'll have we can't physically restrain you. We just can't. We're dealing with our own problems right now, but we're just advising, like medically advising you not to. And I'm like, sign me out against doctor's advice. And they're like, all right. So I signed myself out of doctor's advice and I left that hut. And Barry's character starts following me. And he's like, take me with you. I'm like, you're supposed to stay here. You got to stay here. Like your wizard mentor dude wants you to stay here. Like you can't come with me. Plus, you're not a warrior. You're not a fighter. Like you've never been outside of this town. You do not like. I have seen combat. I've been around the block. Like I'm in my early 70s. Like the last 40 years I've been fighting along the mountains of my kin my foster parents' homeland. Like there's a lot of stuff you have not seen. I've got the 1,000-yard stare and you do not, sir. He's like, "Yeah, but like I can help you with my magic. Plus I know a little bit about medicine and I know a fair amount of lore. I can help you. Also, I've got all these books here." I'm like, "What books?" He's like, "I took them out of the old man's like cellar. Like these are some art, like some really bad, like don't read these books." Like he's been hiding these from me for a while now, but I've been reading a few things in there. Like you might want to know some of the information here, but I won't tell you this information unless you bring me. And I'm like, "So you're extorting me? Like you have information that could help the war effort?" He's like, "Yep, but you won't help the war effort unless I bring you." "Yep." I'm like, "Well, where are we gonna get you a horse? Like, I don't have any money on me. I don't have any money. I don't have a goddamn thing. So I can't pay for the horse. You don't have money. You're just an apprentice." He's like, "Well, we could just steal it and pay him back." Fine. Fine. We'll t- fine. Okay, whatever. We'll take the horse. And so we fucking snuck into town and we spent about 40 minutes in game sneaking around the stables trying to find a horse big enough and easy enough for him to ride because he'd never ridden a horse before. I taught him the very basics of how to ride a horse, and then we broke the lock thanks to it. Just out of sheer strength and willpower, I broke the lock off the stable door, and he rode off, unable to control his horse after everything I just told him. So I had to fucking hop onto my horse that was gifted to me and follow after him. And we started our journey northwards. Just started our journey northwards. Probably a good 3-week journey all the way to the forest. Now, at this point, a few major key events had happened, and we would later learn. We learned a few of them on the road. So Jared and Mitch's character, Peregrine the Paladin and Mitchifer the Priest, are part of a holy order, and they're famous. Like they're very well known and well renowned and beloved by all within their region of the Middle Kingdoms. And they've been on a holy crusade pushing back the enemy on the eastern fringe. Apparently, for like the last 6 months, they've been laying siege to a major stronghold that used to be a fortress or a fort used by the kingdom. And so they've laid siege for it for 6 months, and they've finally broken through, and they slaughtered every enemy they possibly could. None were spared. And so news had started to spread throughout about the first 2 weeks of our travels that uh, there was a breakthrough. Like the war was beginning to move again on the eastern fringe of the Middle Kingdoms, and it was all because of the Holy Order, uh, followed by the Great Peregrine the Mighty and Michifer the Wise. And we were like, wow, that's pretty badass. Well, that's some good news at least. Like Prewa's still being held off by siege. Fucking like the whole western borders of these kingdoms is just being fucking razed to the ground. Like no word from the Grey Elves. The Grey Elves have been quiet this whole time. They've kind of withdrawn their war effort back to their own homelands. And then to the like the dwarves have been getting fucking besieged constantly, and the dwarves thanked me when I helped them, and they told me that if I ever needed help to go back to them, and they'd help me out as best they could. And so we had some good news, a meager amount. Like there was one small victory in this massive like near millennial fucking or near millennia of war. Like this one small sparkle of hope had sprouted, and yeah, that kind of came crashing down when we were beset by some roaming orcs on wargs. Because again, I was the ranger with a wizard, and I'm the only one that knows anything about the wilderness. Barry accidentally stumbled around one night when I told him it's your turn to get firewood. He stumbled around, and I kept telling him like, bring a branch or something and scratch out your footprints. If you land on soft ground or you start walking in tall grass, try and shuffle it so that the grass doesn't look like you've been like somebody was treading over it. And we're going to keep a small fire, and we're going to try and shelter it so that there's barely any light. Just enough to keep just enough for the heat and just enough to put food into it so it'll cook it. Yep, well, he forgot, or he just didn't know how to do it, and they tracked him. And so we were beset by orcs on wargs. And so we started fighting our way through the camp, like around the campfire, trying to hold our own. Barry used up most of his spells because, again, this is D&D. You can't just spawn infinite magic because you can. You have a very limited, especially at like second level, you are very limited with spells. And Barry's not a fighter. So he's basically like the hobbits on Weathertop, just throwing rocks. He's throwing rocks, and and I'm fucking grabbing him by the shoulder and throwing him down to the ground before an axe swings into his head, and I'm fucking trying to defend him as best I can. And I finally yelled to him to get the horses, and so he grabbed his horse, and he's riding and holding the bridle for mine, the bit and bridle, and I was just like, I jump for the horse to try and get onto the saddle. And so I had to roll a jump check, and then I had to roll a grapple check because I was grappling with the saddle and the horse. And thankfully, I just barely succeeded the jump check because I had a running start. But I almost failed the grapple check, so I almost jumped and just hit the horse like I fucking body slammed into the fucking side of a barn, like the side of a barn, and just fell back. But the DM let it slide because he was like, "Yeah, that's actually a pretty good idea and pretty cinematic." And so I'm like, "Awesome." And now I'm all happy. Like, yeah, I'm not dying today. But now we have a group of wargs with orcs on top of them with bows and javelins and spears and axes and swords. And their wargs can attack as well, a lot better than a horse. And we've got about 6 of them still tagging us. So we're now riding fucking like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. The only thing giving us any semblance of light is the moonlight. And because I'm a half elf, and I can't remember because I'm not going to look it up right now because I'm too lazy. But I can't remember if 3.5 gives half elves better dark vision or low light vision. But with the way the DM gave it to me, because I kind of like this, but basically my character, because he's half elven, I could see clearly under the moonlight. It was just like normal daylight for me. Barry, on the other hand, and as everybody here knows, if you were riding a horse through open fields and through wooded areas, you're not going to be able to see shit. Even with like a full moon, there's a depth perception. Like there's a very bizarre depth perception at night with moonlight than there is with sunlight. So Barry's just straggling behind and he cannot keep up with me. Like I'm succeeding my ride checks willy-nilly, no penalties, no nothing. So Barry's finally straggling behind so far, like it's like he's gonna get caught up by the wargs and he's gonna get fucking just surrounded. So I'm like, fuck. So I tell the DM, he's like, "What are you doing? Like, what are you gonna do in this situation?" I'm like, I pull back on the reins and I turn around, I draw my sword and I charge headlong right into the group. And he's like, "All right, well, you're like 180 feet away from Barry, and the wargs are like 100 feet from Barry." I'm like, I'm gonna fucking push, and then it's like, wait, flashback, and I'm starting to think, and I forget which story it was in because there's a lot of fucking fantasy stories and just a lot of like Western movies and Western stories I've read. I look down at my horse and I felt so bad doing this, but I had to. I was like, I okay, I'm going two-handed. And he goes, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going to pull out my dagger and I'm going to stab the hindquarters of this horse to go faster." That's the only way I can think of covering that 80 feet, like the extra 80 feet I have between me and Barry and the wargs and Barry. And he's like, "All right, well, you're gonna have to roll a few ride checks so you don't get like knocked off by this." I'm like, I'll do it. I have to." And so I'm riding the horse as fast as I can. I'm going full gallop, fast as possible. And around fucking, I think 70, 80 feet into it, I'm like, I stab the horse. Like I stab it twice. And he's like, "All right, well, roll me an attack to beat its AC." And you're gonna have to do it at a penalty because it's at night, and even though you have low light vision, like you're riding a horse and you're trying to steer it while holding a sword in one hand. I'm like, fine, and I just barely nicked the horse the first time, and then I just plunge that dagger right into its hindquarters, and it just rears back and starts moving even faster. And Barry's freaking out. He's got a torch and he's fucking trying to wave it around, trying to find out where the fuck I am. He hears my horse just neighing out in the distance from the pain, and he can hear the wargs and the orcs just screeching and hollering and fucking cackling. And finally, Barry turns around and he sees one of the wargs, like its eyes just fucking reflecting the flames and all that. And his horse rears back because it was an intimidate, and the horse knocks back and he falls down. And immediately, as soon as that happened, he's like, the DM goes, "As soon as you fall back and land just inches away from your head is a large rock. And as you look up, as your torch is laying down on the ground, you see Surion leap over you on his horse as he jumps over and lands next to your horse and starts fighting with the warg and its orc rider." And so now I'm swinging my sword and I've got this dagger, and I'm just fighting as best I can on horseback. And now all these wargs are starting to swarm around. And again, I did something I shouldn't have, but it was a matter of life and death for me and Barry. I sacrificed Barry's horse. Like, and I felt so bad doing it because I was not going to be able to handle myself against it was a 6-1 odds. Barry had no spells except for like two light spells, which means he could just turn an inanimate object into a torch. Like, just it's a bright light for like an hour per caster level or something like that. Like, that's all he had. And so, like, my horse is getting clawed up and it's barely standing, not just because of like the massive bleeding from the stabbings I'd given it to speed up. Like, I'm getting badly wounded trying to fight off all these, not just not just the orcs, the wargs too can attack. And I've almost been dismounted twice. And Barry's like, I get up and I scream to Surya, I'm like, what are we gonna do? And I was like, I grab the reins, I turn around, and as I run over to the horse, because the horse had been staying next to me the whole time because it saw me as protection. Oh, I feel so bad. I grab the knife and I was like, I swing and I slit its throat. I slit Barry's horse's throat. And the DM's like, why? Like, what's the reason? Like, I'd like to know your reasoning for this. And it's like, the warg, while slightly intelligent, is still just it's just a monstrous wolf. Like, they have a bloodlust. So if they see all of this blood and smell it, and they see this helpless creature, they're probably going to go after the helpless creature more than the one that's stabbing and slashing at them with a sharp metal object. He goes, all right, I'll allow it. And he's like, well, what are you going to do about Barry? I was like, well, after I slit his horse's throat and it collapses, I'm going to rush. I'm going to pull the reins over and I'm going to fucking lead my horse over to him and I'm going to have him climb on and I'm going to help grab him because I didn't even notice if Barry was injured or not from the fall. And so that poor horse collapsed there and started to slowly bleed out. And it was crying out in pain while I grabbed Barry, threw him onto the back of my horse, which we were close to exceeding it. Like, we were almost at maximum load for its carry weight, especially with the amount of beating it got from the wargs and the orcs and me. And we just limped off as fast as we could right into the night. And I told Barry, don't cast a light, nothing. I asked him, because now I have 2 extra hands. I was like, grab the knapsack on the back of my horse and just grab my cloak so I can cover up my mail so it's not so it doesn't shine in the night so they can't follow us. And don't cast any light spells. Don't set a torch. Nothing. We are just going to ride until, sadly, probably until this horse dies, because I don't know how long she's got to live. And so we just kept on riding. And that was the end of the second session. Just a clusterfuck. Everything that could go wrong almost did go wrong. And so he's like, all right, I'll see both of you on Tuesdays. And we're like, really? He's like, yeah, both of you are together now, so both of you will be coming in on the same sessions. So we're like, oh, okay. And so we talked about what was going on, and we talked about what we could have done better, like, in the situation that we were given. And then Barry was showing me the maps, like the photocopied maps of the area. And so when we came back the next Tuesday, the DM's like, so what do you do? And so Barry was like, well, I've been showing him the maps that you gave me. Is that okay if I showed him that? And he's like, yeah, like, you guys are together now. Like, so in the in between time, like the out of game time, I'll rule as like you guys have been talking as your characters about what's going on. So while you guys are riding your horses or whenever, like you've been showing him the maps like that you have, because my character Surian didn't have any maps. Like I had nothing except for my equipment. So he's like, yeah, so you've been showing him the maps of where to go and how far we are, and you're trying to triangulate everything. And so by by dawn's early light, like that's where we opened up the next session. He's like, as you guys are riding, galloping across the plains, I need I need both of you to roll me a reflex save. And I'm like, oh fuck. So I actually rolled a good reflex save this time. Barry didn't. And what happened basically was while we were galloping across the plains, as the sun just started to get up, we're both exhausted because we hadn't slept yet. Barry's basically falling asleep, and he's just resting himself against me while I'm riding. The horse gave out. Like it had been gasping and just straining itself, pushing as far as it could. And to some extent it was my fault because I was just fucking whipping those reins as fast as I could. I was slapping it, just trying to get as much distance as possible in the quickest amount of time. Because I didn't know when because my horse is going to die. I already knew that. So the wargs, once they were done devouring Barry's horse, they were going to come after ours, and we're leaving a blood trail. And so it finally let go, and it went head first. Like both front legs caved in, and both of us were just launched off of her. And so I was able to catch myself and tuck and roll. And Barry, because he was fucking asleep, fucking just flew off and landed fucking belly flop right into the ground. And he took a bit of damage. And so Barry's kind of fucked up. I'm fucked up from the fight from the orcs and the wargs. And I just turned to Barry, who's now wide awake and in pain. I was like, "Do you have everything you need?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think so." Then he starts, and as he's checking himself, I was like, I run to the horse as fast as possible, and I start searching through the knapsack and the saddlebags. Like I'm looking for everything possible. And he's like, "All right, well, you find a few case scrolls, a tome, a few bits of food, your bandages and medication, and that's about it. That you yourself see is important right now in the moment." And I'm like, I grab it all and I throw it into my sack, like my backpack. So I'm packing it as best as I can, and Barry lets out a yell because the DM had written him a little note, and he's like, because he rolled a secret roll for his perception, which at the time was spot, search, listen. So his spot check, he's like, he had told Barry, yeah, you see in just over the horizon, you can see like 5 or 6 black figures. Like they're pinned, like they're the size of a pinhead on the horizon, but you can visibly see them. And Barry just lets out a yell. And I turn, and because I was reaching into the bag, and I said while I'm like, because I'm grabbing all this, I jerked my arm, and I applied a little bit too much torque to my right shoulder, and the DM picked up on that because I was like, oh well, while I've got my hand in the saddlebag, I quickly turn around, and the DM's like, did you take your hand out of the bag? I was like, no. He goes, roll me a fort save. I'm like, oh, fuck. My wound. Like, because I was really careful during that fight. Like, I'm using both hands. Like, I'm favoring my left arm to move my sword because I'm right-handed, but I'll use my left hand to move stuff. And I'm trying to keep my my left side facing the enemy that I'm fighting. Like, I was really careful about that during that whole fight. Like, I'm using my left hand to stab the horse. I'm trying to follow doctor's orders. Nope. I fuck it up trying to reach in to grab shit out of a saddlebag. And I guess I had just skimmed or just reached the number I needed to succeed. And the DM's like, you feel a sharp twinge of pain in your shoulder, and it feels like something tore, possibly the stitching, like the sewing for your like the field dressing they gave you. So you've pulled a few stitches, but nothing too serious. But there's still a little bit of blood coming out, and you can feel it seeping into your gambeson, the padding under your hauberk. And so role playing. I'm like I cry out a little bit in pain, but try to muffle it so I don't give out my position. And I grab the rest with my left hand and I stuff it into the backpack and I throw it over my shoulder and I rush over to Barry. And so Barry tells me he saw six figures faintly over the horizon, and he doesn't know if they're coming towards us, away from us, or what. So I'm like, well, it's time to go. I grabbed everything I possibly could that's in the saddlebags and in the packs. Let's go. And so now we're force marching it. And neither of us have endurance. Yet again, another fucking it's a feat that people get. Like Ranger gets it for Ranger gets it as a free feat, but I forget if it's first level you get endurance or second or third level you get it. And fucking it's just so underused, it's sad. Like it is really sad that fucking not a lot of DMs use shit like and that's one thing that I like about like Matt's brother. And Matt's brother's name is Bob, by the way, or Robert. But yeah, like just Rob liked using the obscure rules, and that's why I use the obscure rules because they add flavor, like weather, force marching, the speed and how fast you move across land, overland, or through water, the weight, like weight matters, and it's like when it comes to endurance, you avoid non-lethal damage. Like you get a +4 to a +4 bonus to that. Like you get a pretty and I'd say early level, like during the early levels and later on, like a pretty beastly +4 bonus for avoiding non-lethal damage while being in a force march. And it also helps with like holding breath, swim checks, like if you're going against a current, um, resisting like non-lethal damage for environments, like if you're in the desert or in the tundra or during a blizzard, um, like trying to resist suffocation, and also endurance helps you when it comes to being fatigued when sleeping in your armor, which helped out a lot. And so we're both at our end, like at ends rope now. Like we're both exhausted. We haven't slept really. Barry got like an hour's worth of sleep to maybe a 2 hours worth of sleep, but that's nothing because he was on a horse and he was kind of hurt before when he got fucking hit. He got hit like I think twice, just barely grazed by the orcs when they attacked the camp. Then he fell off a horse, and now he's fallen off a horse a second time. This time even worse. So now we're being put into a forced march, and that will add non-lethal damage. And once a certain amount of non-lethal damage stacks, it becomes lethal damage. And so we're trying to stave off this fucking event. Like, we're moving as hard and as fast as we can, and we've still got a long way to go. Like, oh god, like we've got like a week. We've still got a week's like, and that's by horseback. Like a week's trip by horseback away from where we were. And looking at the maps, like the quickest route is to just go in a straight line, but we can't go into a straight line because most of that is just open plain with a few wooded and hilled regions. But what I chose to do and what I told Barry that we were going to do is that we were going to veer right, and we are just going to go, instead of going straight north, we were going to go northeast, because as we went northeast there was another river, and near that river was a lot of wooded patches of area and probably undergrowth, and we could probably hold out there and just live off the land for like a day or two. And with the undergrowth and with the trees, we'd have cover, and just we're right next to a river, so they'd lose our scent, and we could just follow the river up all the way to the forest, the Mirren forest. And so Barry's like, you're the ranger, like you're the general, like I'll listen to you. And so we started marching and marching and marching, and we just kept on going. Like we'd lay down, we'd find a little ditch, like or a small little clove, nap for like 2-3 hours, and as soon as we'd hear just the slightest hint of something coming towards us, we'd like the person staying on watch would wake the other up, and we'd pack up and leave. No fires, nothing. We didn't stop for water. We didn't stop for a fucking thing. Like, and we sparingly drank our water and ate. Like, we had to get away from those wargs and orcs, because we didn't like, if there's 6 of them still, they might send out a few of the pack to go and get more of them to cover more ground. And so on we went for like 3 days in game until we finally reached the river. And it's I wouldn't say it's a massive river. I'd say it's about 20 feet wide. And it's not that deep. Where we reached it, we kind of lost track of where we were going, because Rob was like, "Yeah, you're gonna take penalties because of the exhaustion," and we started failing our checks against force march, so we were starting to lose health and just mental fortitude. And so now we're fucking mentally drained trying to look at this map, and we're starting to lose our sense of direction. And so we kind of veered off a little further east than north. So instead of reaching one of the deeper parts of the river where I had planned to go, we'd reach more of where the shallower parts are, where there was a ford or a crossing. And at that point, me and Barry just collapsed, and we were like, we can't keep going on like this. We can't. It's just too much. Like, we're hungry, cold, tired, just badly wounded. My wound didn't really fully like my wound is still just ruined. I haven't had time to like follow the doctor's orders of cleaning it out every day and like re-bandaging it. I haven't done that in like 3-4 days. So the wound's starting to get a little bit more infected again. I had torn it just a little bit, fucking moving with that kind of torque when I looked at Barry yelling. And so I'm just like, let's go over here to this. There's some briars and undergrowth here. We're just going to go there. And we only had like 1 or 2 feet before we were in the river. And we just collapsed right there. I threw my pack down, and I just laid there. And Barry's sitting there just he's like, I rest up against a tree. Like, fuck laying down on the ground. I'm like, Barry, I fought the orcs and the wargs. I'm tired. Also, my wound's hurting me. I'm just going to lay here. And so we just slept and slept and slept and slept and slept some more. And we lost track of the time sleeping. And it was like high noon when we got there. And by the time we woke up, it was like 10 o'clock at night. And now we're terrified because we had totally lost track of time. We didn't set up any kind of shelter because we didn't know what the weather was going to be like. And we didn't clear our tracks. We didn't move further up. We only moved like 20 feet off the beaten path. We've barely got any food or water to last us. We have no torches right now. We had used the last of ours the few nights before. So we're up shit creek without a paddle. And so now we're trying to figure out what are we going to do? Like we're still exhausted. Like 10 hours of sleep ain't going to cover like the sheer length of time that we spent wide awake overexerting ourselves. So I was like, Barry, you still have those 2 light spells. Okay, good. Take this dagger. And I handed him his weapon because he only had a staff. And he lost his staff when he fell off the horse because I had to grab him. So I was like, take this dagger is yours until we get to the Mirin forest. Cast light on it. So it'll be a torch. So we'll have light. And you'll also have some way of defending yourself. And I know you don't know how to use a dagger, but it's all you got. And it's all I have to give you. So try and find sticks. And I'm not talking to start a fire. I mean walking sticks, because we're going to need something to lean on. And he's like, what are you planning? I'm like, we're going to start marching. We're just going to start following this this river goes northwards. The water is coming down towards us. So we have to we got to follow it upstream. And so we spent that probably about 30 to 40 minutes trying to find some loose branches. And we only found one. And so I had to fucking help pry with, again, fucking up my arm because I failed the fort save this time. I used both my arms to force break a branch off of the tree and use that as a walking stick. And so my arm's even worse for wear. I thankfully was like, yeah, I'll grab some water and I'll try and scrub some of the dirt and grime and fucking crusty shit growing, like just forming in my wound. And I'll bandage it up like a very quick bandage. So now my right arm's not really doing too good. And Rob, the DM's like, yep, well, you're going to take a -1 because of how your arm's been acting up. You're going to take a -1 if you use that arm. And I'm like, okay, I'm fine with the -1. It's kind of my fault for not taking care of it. And so we start marching, and we're marching northwards and northwards and northwards, and we're following like the stream. We don't really know what the fuck's in store for us. We don't know where the wargs and that roaming band of wargs and orcs are. And for like, I'd say 4 days, we just stayed close by the river, drank nothing but water, and we were eating grubs just to survive. Like, the bread we had went bad. Like, what little bread we still had gone bad because of fucking just the haphazard way of opening it, like unwrapping the bindings that kept like the wax paper or whatever that was keeping it fresh, and just constantly opening it just so we could slice off little bits of it here and there. It finally went stale and then went bad. And so we're down to eating grubs, wild berries, and drinking water. And we finally had some fucking relief and good luck. because not just right over the horizon we can see mountains, and there's a few mountainous like there's like 3 or 4 mountains in the forest itself at the very heart of the woodlands. And I'm like, oh, we're almost there, Barry. We're almost there. And Barry's like, how far is it though? Like, we can see the mountains, but they're way off in the distance. Like we can barely see them with the horizon. I'm like, I don't care. Like, it's good news, Barry. Like, we're closing in on the forest. Like, we'll go there, we'll talk. Like, I know who to speak to. I know the language. I'll be able to communicate with them. And that's probably one of the most surprising things about Barry's character is that he did not take any bonus languages for the other races. He took their languages on paper. Their written languages he took because he thought that would make more sense for somebody that's an apprentice. Being able to read it and understand what the letters were, like, it's hard to describe because there's going to be some D&D players and certain people will be like, well, if you know how to read in a language, you'll know how to speak in that language. Not exactly. Like, I can read Braille. I can't do sign language. Or I can read I can understand what most things on Portuguese signs say here in the city, but I would not be able to pronounce it properly. I'd fuck it. I'd butcher the Portuguese language. And so basically that's how Barry was. He could read something, he couldn't pronounce or speak it fluently. So like if it's an arcane tome that says like that has a spell or something or is showing, like, he'd be like, "Oh, okay, so that's what that means." He wouldn't be able to pronounce it fully, which is what Algero was trying to teach him. Was he was trying to teach him the languages and how to pronounce things, because certain spells, incantations need to be pronounced properly, or else they don't work. And so Barry's like, "Well, you're gonna have to be the translator. I know how to read Elvish, but I can't speak it, and I don't want to say anything to offend them. Like, I don't want to screw something up." And I'm like, "Okay." And so we start. Now we got our hopes up. Everything's going good, and that's when we came across not a tavern per se, but a small hut right next to the river with a mill next to it. But it wasn't a mill for farming. It just had a water wheel next to it. And we went inside, and the whole place has been abandoned. Windows shattered, the doors kind of hanging off of one of the hinges. And so we just start scavenging the place, and we found a few bottles of ale that were just kept inside of a fucking little lockbox in a cupboard, and the lockbox wasn't locked, and a few things of preservatives. And so we devoured the preservatives. We didn't even care what they were. They could have been pickled pig's feet, fucking pickled eggs, and I fucking hate pickled eggs and pig's feet. It could have been tripe, anything. We just devoured it because we were that fucking hungry. And then we drank some of the ale or wine that was in that cupboard. And once our stomachs were full and we were a little tipsy, we started on moving, and we were like, all right, there we go. Well, now we're not hungry, we're not starving. Yeah, we could live off the land still, but feeling a little bit better with whatever the fuck I just ate. And so we start just we're starting to jog We're not walking. We're not walking at half speed. We're jogging at this point. And for the next like 2 days, 2 3 days, things were going fine. We were still doing rolls for forced march, and we were trying to keep our eyes on the weather. We were trying to keep our eyes out for anything out of the ordinary. And we finally reached the eaves of the woodland realm. And I will be right back because I am thirsty and I need a drink. Okay, I'm back. Let me just mix it up and then pull the fucking wrapper off. There we go. Oh, Facebook. Oh, lovely. Okay. So, we finally reached the woodland realm of the Mirin, or the Grey Elves. And that's all fine and kind. It's what Barry and me know of. Now, Barry knows the rumors and what he's read in a book. My character used to live there, and that's when it kind of went south. Because my character had only lived there until he was like 6 or 7, like still like a toddler in half elf years. So I don't know like where I am on the map. Like we didn't know where we were exactly on the map. We didn't know which one of the noble houses reigned over this part of the area. We didn't know what had been going on because we'd been traveling for almost like 3.5 weeks to this, and a lot can happen in 3.5 weeks. And so we're now down to what are we going to do? Like we can follow the river up through the woods, or we can try and travel around and find a location, like a path, or we can wait and see if there's like any elves that come through here or what. And so I'm like, we'll just go in. Like we can't keep waiting out here because if those orcs or whatever's following us are still following us and they track us here, we're still going to have to run into the woods. And so whatever's in the woods that might want to try and kill us are going to still try and want to kill us. But now we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. So we're going to have to go in. And so Barry's like, well, all I have is this dagger, so I'm not really going to be that much use to you. And so we go in. And as we're following the river up, we're making damn sure that there ain't no spooks ready to jump out at us. Like we hear a twig snap, we turn, and we're weapons drawn, ready to fight. Like we are not in a good mood. Like we're stopping here and there to gather some edible roots and some berries. Like Barry's telling me like, yeah, there's two of the noble houses aren't as stringent about trespasses in their borders, but there's one noble house that will vehemently they will punish you severely for just disregarding their sacred rights and just ravaging the land. And I'm like, well, if anybody's going to like trespass and just forsake their sacred rights, it'll be me. So if they catch us and they start questioning us, blame me, and I'll be the one that hunts if we have to hunt, and if we do find some wild game or some tracks, I'll hunt it just so we can survive. And wouldn't you know, we come across that very same fucking House of Elves, because while traveling, we found some deer tracks, and we're now like a day and a half's march into these woods. We're like a couple miles into the woods, and it's thick fucking. It's like a primordial forest. Like say the best thing I could think of is British Columbia, like the redwood forests. There's a lot of fucking undergrowth and moss everywhere. Fucking, it's just really, really fucking tough goings. And we finally find some deer tracks, and and I'm tracking this deer, and Barry's staying at the small little camp because we've finally eased off of our paranoia, and we're like, we're pretty far into these woods now, and I don't think they'll be able to follow us. And so I'm hunting, and I finally get to a glade, and I see this deer, like this 10-point buck, just eating. And I'm like, that's a very tasty looking deer. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to use? I don't have a bow. And so I'm looking around, and I see that I still have my walking stick. And I don't have a dagger on me, but I have my sword. So I just slowly pull out my sword, and I start whittling as best I can a sharp point on this spear. And I roll my move silently check so I can sneak towards it, and just as I'm in throwing distance, I just hurl it with all what little strength I have. I forgot to say left arm. I used my right. And so the DM's like, "All right, so you're gonna throw the spear?" I'm like, "Yeah." I grab the spear and I just throw it with all my might. He goes, "All right, well, I'm gonna need you to roll me a fort save first." I'm like, "Fuck, that's right. God damn it!" And I fail, and I fail hard. So once I failed my fort save, he goes, "All right, so you grabbed the spear, you finally sharpened it, you've successfully stalked your prey, and you're now right in position to kill it and deal a fatal blow. And as you reel back and as you hurl it, just as you open your hand and the shaft leaves your hand, you feel every muscle in your shoulder down to halfway through your pec just burning. And I mean an intense burning pain as the muscles tear. And you can actively feel the shards of metal from those arrowheads that still haven't come out just slicing your shoulder up. And you let out a loud cry of agony. And I'm like, fuck me. He's like, I will let you know this. You did hit that deer and you did kill that deer. but you've dropped down to the ground and you're just holding your shoulder. And so I'm screaming out in pain, and the DM rolls a secret roll for his Barry's listen, and he's like, Barry, you hear this out, like, you just, while sitting there relaxing, waiting for Syrian to come back with anything, you hear him screaming out in pain. And Barry's like, I get up and I start calling him out to try and get it, like, to get my bearings as to which direction it's coming from, because it's echoing in these woods, right? He's like, yeah, it's echoing. So now Barry's yelling out my character's name, trying to figure out which direction I'm in. I can't hear Barry because I'm screaming in pain, and because I'm more focused on the burning, searing pain of my wound. And as the pain starts to subside, just enough for me to regain, like, a clear head somewhat, I faintly hear Barry call out help, and that's it. And so I get up and I walk over to the deer and I grab the spear with my left arm, and I use my leg to pry it out of its body. And now I'm slowly hobbling back with my spear in my right arm while my left hand is holding the wound, trying to keep it from bleeding, and trying to just apply pressure to it, just on the hopes that it'll help ease the pain. And as I hobble back to camp, Barry is gone and the whole camp has been ransacked. And I'm looking around and I'm just beside myself. I don't know what to do. Like, I'm like, I search for tracks. And so I roll for for tracking, and I find a few footprints of Barry's from where he was running around trying, like, calling out. Like, he'd go 10 feet one way and call out and listen to see if I could call out to him, and then he'd go 20 feet this direction, and he's going all over the camp. And then finally he took 5 feet, like, in another direction, and there's only half a footprint. And there's nothing else. There's no trail whatsoever. And then the DM's like, "Well, what do you do?" I'm like, "I searched the like, what, like, the camp is ransacked, right? Like, we built a lean-to for shelter. Is that still up?" And he's like, "Yep, that's still up." I was like, "What about the campfires? The campfire still going?" He's like, "Campfire is smoldering at this point, but that's because somebody hasn't been putting firewood into it." I'm like, "Where's the backpack? Like, we only have one backpack. Where's the backpack?" He's like, "The backpack's there, but it's turned over and ripped open. And the bandages and all the herbs and medication that the healers gave you are gone. The scrolls are gone. The maps you guys have are gone. Practically everything of importance is gone. The only thing that's not gone are the few odds and ends that you guys had, like whetstones, string, any of the knickknacks or miscellaneous items you can buy off the uh, item lists. Like, some of the few things there, Barry's quill and inkwell and charcoal, that's still there. A few pieces of vellum that he hasn't written on, his journal, and uh, berries and grubs and like the small things that we've been living off the land, like what we gathered up that day or what Barry had gathered up that day, still there. And I'm like, where the fuck did he go? And immediately the DM's like, roll me a listen check and a spot check. And so I roll and I hear something, but I can't see it. And he says, you hear rustling. And I'm like, well, I just instinctively, I'm drawing my sword. He's like, why are you drawing your sword? It could just be wildlife. I'm like, Barry's missing. The whole camp has been ransacked. All of our information that we need and the information that Barry was basically lording over me is gone. Like, the information he said that would be vital for the war effort is gone. So it has to have been the orcs. Like, the orcs following us must have finally followed us further up than we thought, and they must have had probably didn't have a rough time coming through here, and they captured Barry. Because why would Barry be yelling for help? He's like, "All right, well, you draw your sword, and now you're standing there. What do you do?" I'm like, I'm gonna look. I'm actively going to look around. I'm gonna actively search for what's going on and what's making that noise. And so I keep rolling, and I'm rolling decent rolls, and he's like, "You still don't see anything. Like, you're standing there, and you're turning around every now and then, slowly trying not to give off too much noise, but you still don't see anything. But you're still hearing rustling." And that's when he's like, "Roll me a reflex save." And sure enough, I fuck up my reflex save. Just I think the roll that I needed to get was like a 15, but I got like a 13, and I got clocked in the head because I didn't look up, and what was above me was what was making the rustling. It was it was the gray elves, and they'd been tracking us for some time, and they'd been keeping tabs on us, and they had heard our plan, and they'd been listening in on our conversations this whole time without us knowing. And because we had been together the entire time, they didn't want to try and knock one of us out and the other one still be awake and see it, because then they'd put up a fight. So when we split off, that's when they were like, "Yeah, now's our time to strike." They'd already snatched up Barry, knocked him out, and already bound him and black bagged him. And now they've knocked me out and they black bagged me, and they've put manacles on me, or fetters, along with Barry. And that was the end of the session. And so we're now like, fuck. We're out of one fucking frying pan, and now we're in another. Great. And so next Tuesday comes, and we're just told right out the gate, like, "You guys wake up, like, the bags get lifted off of you, and you're thrown to the ground, and whoever's behind you kicks you in the knees, so you'll land on your knees, so you're kneeling." And we're looking around like, "Well, what do we see?" And he's like, "You see 6 angry looking elves dressed in full camouflage. 2 of them have bows with arrows nocked but not drawn. One of them has a sword out, and the other 3 are talking and debating amongst themselves." So you have 3 guards, and then 3 others are talking. I'm like, "I'm listening. I'm gonna listen in onto the conversation." And he's like, "Well, roll me a speak languages check, because you're kind of dazed from getting clocked in the head with whatever they clocked you in the head with." And so I just barely make out some of the conversation. And then what the conversation is one of the guards wants to let me go because he knows the sigils and the brooch that's on my belt and on my and the craftsmanship. He knows that what I'm wearing is elven crafted equipment, and so I might be a straggler from what they're calling the Battle of Four Rivers, which would eventually become the name of that fucking battle. But the other 2 think that I'm a spy, and that the wizard, the other guy beside me, is either a captive or my accomplice, because they've been looking at the books that Barry grabbed, and there's a lot of stuff that's kind of unsettling to them and what's in and worrying them. And so those two are arguing with I guess the captain of this group. And that's all I could, and I'm getting snippets here and there of the conversation. And so I'm like, I speak Elvish and I speak in the Elven tongues and tell them that I am no spy. He's like, they immediately turn around and look at you. And the DM turns around, looks over to the table that Barry was sitting at, and he waves, and in comes Jess, the Elven Druid. Or as she would later be known, Lathy Mayern. And so we just started calling her Lat, or Lathy. And she is one of the, so when she was playing, she's part of she's part of an order of, it basically border patrol for this elven house and kingdom. And so it's a group of druids and rangers that patrol their borders and slaughter anything that comes in, because they're now fully isolationist, and they have taken up the idea that they can't beat the enemy in open combat. But if they can hold the line and give up and cause enough grief, the enemy will just avoid them and just be like, fuck it, we'll just leave those elves to themselves. They're not going to go anywhere. They're going to stay in their woods and just live their lives. And the war will win the war, and then we'll deal with them whenever that will be, if we want to, because by then all hope will be lost for them, even conceiving the thought of actually prizing victory out of the jaws of defeat. And so they're kind of defeatists at this point for the majority, but the Border Patrol are allying around, trying to fight the good fight. Uh-oh. Okay, there we go. Everything went... Okay. Everything went silent for me, for my headset, for a second. And it sounded like something got disconnected. So that was spoopy. So, so the Border Patrol's now becoming, they're not getting as much funding as they need. Like, the kingdom isn't giving them as much resources as they need, or the manpower, because they're slowly thinning. And so this group has been in that area of the woods that we entered for a few weeks now, and they just happen to stumble upon us. And so Jess is one of the members, and they just been tracking us. And so for her session, it basically was, oh yeah, you see two random dudes just walking in. And so she was following us and tagging us the whole time. And since she's not the captain of the group, she was following the captain's orders, and the entire time she's been arguing like they're probably spies. And so the captain's like, he can't be a spy. He's wearing who would be able to kill somebody of that rank and title? And so she's been vehemently against me not being a spy. And so as soon as her and the rest of the group hear me speak out in Elvish, now they're kind of caught off guard. And so now they're interrogating me. And they're speaking fluent Elvish. Like, these motherfuckers, like Jess's character could speak English, like common, like the common tongues of men. She could speak common and dwarven, but she was more heavily fluent in her native tongue and dwarven, because of how isolationist they are. And they were this house has always been very isolationist. And so she's speaking in Elvish, just yelling and interrogating Barry, and Barry's just looking to me and then looking back at her and the other fucking elves. And I'm like, he can't speak and he doesn't understand you. Like, speak to me. Like, I'm the one who can speak Elvish. And so they start asking me who I am, what am I doing? And I'm still trying not to say a fucking thing about my heritage, because I don't know if they're working for the enemy. I don't know what's going on because I've never been in this section of the woodland realm. And so I just tell them that I am part of the honor guard for Ben Orr. And they're like, "Yeah, we're not believing you on that." Like, he rode out northward. He rode out to the west to go across the mountains to gather up men from the war elves and from the houses and tribesmen that still followed under his banner. And he rallied men, and then he marched over the mountains once again. We haven't heard from him since. Like, there's no way that you survived and he didn't, because he's one of the greatest warriors that we've heard of. And then Barry's looking at him. He's like, tell them that you're, the son of Ben Orr and David Bowie. That will work." And I'm looking at him and I'm like, no, I'm not going to tell him that I'm the son of Ben Orr, nor am I going to say that I'm related to David Bowie. And now Jess knows Common, and the captain of this patrol can speak Common, and they completely understand me. And they're like, "Excuse me?" And they say this in Common, and I'm like, and me and Barry just both look at them dumbfounded and go, "You guys speak Common?" And so now they're questioning me even more, like, how you're related to Ben Orr and David Bowie? That explains it. So now the captain of the guard's looking at Jess's character, and he's like, "See, I told you. Like, it's a good thing I didn't give the order to kill them, because we would have killed, like, one of the noble heirs." And we the amount of anger that it would cause a civil war amongst the tribunal, let alone the Middle Kingdoms if they survive. And so Jess is still kind of cautious. She's still not trustful, but she's like, "Fine, like, you're giving the orders, Captain. What do you want to do with them?" He's like, "Well, if we can't take his word. We'll take his word at face value. Like, he could, for all, like you said, he could be an imposter. I'm not fully convinced that he's a spy, but I'm doubtful that he's a spy. But we'll bring him before the tribunal as a prisoner, along with his comrade." And so they start marching us through, and it's like a 4-day trip to the nearest settlement. And they check both of us in as prisoners. They tell them to send word towards the tribunal to gather, so that they can have a trial, and they can see if I'm a spy, because they have magic, and their magic is strong. And I'm just sitting there like, well, at least I'm not being chased anymore. I mean, yeah, I'm still like I'm in a jail cell now, but at least I'm getting like food, and there's a bed, and I can rest. And so me and Barry are resting in the same cell, eating food, and we're not really complaining. And like, Jess is one of the guards. Like, Jess has decided, yeah, I'm gonna take up watch over them just in case, because I don't know if they're not spies. And she is completely shocked and confused at our reaction. Like, you've got two. So picture it, like, you've found two would be like armed, just travelers trespassing into your lands. they're not real, like, they're trying to be sneaky about it all. They're looking over their shoulder all the times, and just the slightest sound, they're looking over their shoulders and drawing their weapons. And then they have these tomes, and I still don't know what's in these goddamn tomes that Barry's got that apparently will help the war effort. But like, they, apparently they have secret classified documents in one of their backpacks, which explains why they might be so paranoid. And one of them is dressed in like this very high quality chainmail with a really nice elven sword. And then the other one's a wizard. And they don't know what kind of wizard he is. He could be a 19th or 20th level wizard. They don't know. Like, how can you tell how strong a wizard is just by his appearance? Unless he makes himself look strong. Which, again, could just be a ruse. And now you've captured them. They've been complaining and struggling during the capture. You throw them into jail so they can await trial before you transfer them to the said trial. And they're just laughing and having a good time and eating food and enjoying like gruel and water with maybe like a half loaf of bread with like 2 slices of cheese, and they are enjoying it as if it's like a grand feast. It's going to be kind of off-putting. And me and Barry are just talking about how lucky we are. Like, huh. Like, don't, well, and like Barry's like, don't worry. Like, if this is how I think it's gonna play out, like we're gonna be free and clear. They're gonna have we're gonna have to be free and clear because that's the Mirren tribunal. Like, your grandfather is head of one of the houses. He's one of the tribunal. And I'm like, yeah, but who's to say that he's here? He could he could have been heading here and died or been attacked. Like, we got attacked. So how do you know that he's actually gonna? Well, he has to be here. He's part of the tribunal. I'm like, yeah, but you should know, like, if he's not here, then his heir or one of his like counselors or fucking there'll be a ward to take his place in his absence. Who's to say that they'll believe me? Like, I haven't been here since I was like a child. It's been decades. It's like it's been like 50, 60 years since I was here. He goes, well, whatever magic they're going to use, like, if it's to detect a lie, like, they're not going to be able to like disprove you. Like, you're going to be shown to be speaking the truth. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so, but still, like, it's complicated, like, because, and then Barry starts thinking about it, and he's like, oh, that's right. Where would the isolationist, like, angry elves, like the Mirkwood elves that don't care what the fuck you say, like, oh, we're just 13 dwarves and a hungry hobbit, and we saw you having a feast, and we're starving, and it's like, throw them in the dungeon. Throw them in the dungeon and let them starve to death until they tell us why they're in our woods. That's basically what these elves were like. And it's like, who's to say that the tribunal won't side with them and not use that magic? And that's when I finally like, Barry, what was in the books? Like, what, like, the only way I can see us being free is if you tell me what was in those books. Because if I know what's in those books, then I can probably give you a safe, like a safe estimate. And now Barry's kind of worried. I'm like, Barry, what's in those books? And Barry's like, it'll help the war effort. And I'm like, yes, Barry, that's why I had to reluctantly take you with me. What were in those books? He's like, some information? And now I'm getting frustrated and angry, and I'm ready to strangle him because now I'm realizing that maybe we're not going to get out of this. Maybe Barry grabs some evil magic books. And I'm like, Barry, I'll ask you again nicely. Like my shoulder is still like my shoulder's starting to mend itself again. What are in those books? And as Barry starts babbling because he's starting to speak like a million miles, like 50 miles per hour, incoherently babbling. I just grab him by the scruff of the tunic again and I start shaking him like, Barry, what's in the books? What's in the books? And he goes, it's about the obelisks. It's about the black obelisks, and it's about the foundations placed here in the realms by Therisden. And as soon as he says that fucking name, not only does my wound hurt, but the elves standing outside our cell clasp their ears and gasp, and they turn around and look at us. And I'm like, who is that? And he goes, you don't know about Theris? And as soon as I cover his mouth. I'm like, I don't know what you're saying, but it's hurting me, and it's insulting or pissing off the elves. Who, without saying their name, who? And he goes, oh, that's right. You can't say his name, and the elves don't want to say his name. And I'm like, who is he? He goes, it's the Hand of Doom. And that's when it snaps into my head because Rob, the DM, had told me that my family was cursed by the Hand of Doom. And that's our name for it, the Hand of Doom. Because one of my ancestors, like 2,000 years prior, had challenged Therisden. And for D&D players, you'll know who Therisden is. But he had called out Therisden on his shit. Like right when this Great War started to like pick up steam. And so, just to spite my family's legacy and lineage, the Hand of Doom has been coming down and fucking with us. And so, each family member since that one ancestor, the Hand of Doom has been meddling in their affairs. Usually at a very fucking bad time. And for some reason, just the utterance of Therisden pains me, not just because of my human lineage, but because of my elven lineage. Because Therisden has done something that I don't even know about, but he has fucked with the elves, and he has caused such a traumatic event during the first age, and this is like around the second age, but like 3,000 years ago in the first age, like he had done something to the elves during like the first Great War that was so traumatic that when they hear his utterance, it pains them. And so they don't say that name, and they use another name for him, which is Morion, which means the one. And as soon as he stops basically spilling out his guts, and because Barry keeps fucking stumbling over the word Therisden, he'll get halfway through it and he'll stop. He finally tells me that the books contain arcane knowledge of obelisks, which were constructed by Therisden during the first age. Because Therisden had gotten his hand, it was like a Galactus kind of event where Galactus puts his fingers into the world before he devours it. Therisden did something like that, and where his fingers were placed, there are now obelisks. And he's not, and there's no definitive number for how many obelisks are around. But these black stoned obelisks are how he is able to affect the material plane, and it's how he communes with the dark gods that are sided with him, and it's how his minions and just disciples communicate. And so Barry had information onto the location, a few locations as to where some of these obelisks were, as well as a little bit of information as to how to basically roots down to them, and a possible theory, not a concrete fact, but a possible theory into how to shatter one. But it's all old man Algiro's fucking crazy ramblings, as he put it. He doesn't know if, like, because he's so advanced in age, he doesn't know that if his mind is slipping and he's just frantically thinking up of a way to solve this issue or not. And so Barry thought that would be good for the war effort. The problem is, one of the books is how to commune with the dark god. And now I'm just seething with anger. I am just absolutely livid with this man. Because I'm like, really? You've grabbed a book that instructs you on how to commune with one of these evil blackstone obelisks and commune with Therisden, the Dark Lord. And you thought that was a good idea. And you didn't think of telling me this information up until this point. He's like, well, I didn't know if you I don't know, like, how was I supposed to know that, like, you guys didn't know any of this, or like it's information you guys might need to know, like it could probably help us in, like, in a pinch, maybe, I don't know, but it's something. I just grabbed a few of the tomes that Algiro told me not to read, and I just grabbed them all. And I'm like, well, Barry, thank you. Thank you for being honest with me. And he goes, well, it's the least I can do. And I'm like, no, I still have to thank you. And he goes, for what? I'm like, you've sealed our fate. Like, there is no way they are going to let us out alive. He's like, yeah, but you're the grand. I was like, doesn't matter if I'm the grandson. Doesn't matter if I'm the grandson. Don't you see? Like, this is the smoking gun that they want. Like, say for all intents and purposes, I tell them the full truth that I'm not a spy. Who's to say I'm not corrupted by, like, these books? Who's to say that I didn't go and, like, turn on the, like, what if I, like, there are so many ways they can turn this around on me and you to show that we're spies, if not agents of the dark gods. We have 2 unholy manuscripts detailing all of this information. We could have been transporting it, Barry. Don't you see? And he's like, well, there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way out of this. And I'm like, I don't know. I really don't know. And Jess this whole time is just listening in, and she, as soon as I'm done and I just sit down and put my head in my hands in just utter defeat, she's like, I rush over to speak to the captain of the guard. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Great. Great. This is. I was all happy eating my gruel and one slice of cheese with a little half cup of water, and now I'm being told that this might be my last meal on this fair green earth. Lovely, just lovely. And so that was it for the session because Rob, the DM, just goes, "Yep, uh, now that's we'll end it here for now, folks." And he gave us a ride home, and Barry hung out with me for a few hours at my place. I'm like, "God damn it, Barry! Why did you keep this from me?" And he's like, "Well, when like it, I was talking I was talking to Rob about it and asking him what books, and he told me that Algero had these books talking about the dark gods, and he told me not to read those until I was ready, and so I grabbed them. And I haven't fully read into them, but on our travels when I had the spare time to read, I've been delving into it, and I don't even know if it will be useful. I don't know. Like, I don't know that, like, I don't know if we'll be able to break one. I don't know if we'll be able to do anything. I just don't know. But like I said, I thought it'd be a good idea because maybe there's some magical people or entities out here in the wider world that might know. I'm like, thanks, Barry. Like, at least tell me next time when something like that happens. That way I can be in on it and I can defend you, or we can work together to try and get everything all sorted out instead of getting trapped. And so next week came, and Jess, instead of playing on Fridays, started playing with us on Tuesdays because we liked Tuesdays. And so next session, Jess comes back with the captain of the guard, and she immediately tells both of us, hands up against the walls. So we put our hands up against the walls, and they open up the gate, the the cell door. What story? By the Oh, hey Tom, you haven't missed the whole story. Been a long time. Been a long time. Tom is an OG. Back in the elder days of Blog TV. He hasn't missed a whole lot. Like he watched the first two parts possibly. I know he commented on one part on Facebook. So, hang on, I'm gonna dump my ashtray now. Oh, great, and that bag's got a tear in it, so I'll have to dump it. So, You're not as old as me. Calm down, Jen. So, session opens up. Jess, who's the elven druid, walks up with the captain of the guard and tells both me and Barry, hands against the wall. So we put our hands against the walls. They come in, they cuff us, and they start walking us out, single file out of the jail cell. And oh boy, it's a death march. Like we're both pretty certain that we're going to be getting into a cart and going down one of these windy old wooded paths all the way to the tribunal, just to be told guilty, hang them, just hang them. And we get to, I'd say about like a 6 hour like horse-drawn carriage ride all the way there, and it's just a beautiful palace, like this very Rivendell-esque looking uh palace. Matter of fact, no, it I would say it was more like Nargothrond from the first age of Lord of the Rings. Like it's built into one of the mountains, or a very or like a cliffside. And so we get carted off into this place. We dismount off the cart. They fucking walk us in, and they bring us into the grand hall. It's like it's not like a courtroom. It's just like a great hall, and they have three seats up on a stepped pedestal or rise. You guys know what I'm talking about. And so they have the three seats. One of the elven lords of the tribunal sitting there already. The other two aren't present yet. And so not only are the six guards there with us that caught us, like the border patrol, but now there's even more guards. Like the guards and like the honor guards and the elite fucking praetorians of the tribunal are now following us as extra like security. And the elves are like the border patrolmen are talking to the honor guards and explaining what's going on. And then they hand off my backpack that has these evil fucking tomes that Barry's character has been carting around for like 4 or 5 weeks. And it's like, oh god. And I'm hearing like I'm trying to listen in on the conversation as best as I can. I'm only getting snippets here and there because they're talking so fluently and so fast. And they're speaking like double speak because they know that my character can understand and speak like fluent Elvish as well. So they're kind of doing a double speak and using code words. And I don't know what their like the code is. So I'm completely in the dark. And so finally we get brought before the elven lord that's present, and he demands to know like who we are. And one of his advisors comes up and starts whispering into his ear. And I guess the advisor was telling him about who we were and what information the border patrolman had given him. And he's like, "Well, you," and like Rob, the DM, points to me and goes, he points to you. I'm like, I get up and I walk up, and he's like, "All right, well, two of the guards grab you by the shoulders to make sure you don't try to make a run for it or anything." I'm like that's gonna like I'm going to like where am I gonna run to? And I'm like, yes, yes, my lord. And he goes, uh, you say that you're the grandson of David Bowie? I'm like, yes, I'm the grandson of David Bowie, and the son of Ben Orr. And he's like, do you have any proof? I'm like, well, I did have a brooch, like a belt buckle with the depiction of the swan and dragon, but the border patrol took that. I also have a sword etched with my name on the fuller with the Mirren craftsman, like the war elves crafted a Mirren style longsword for me. Well, bastard sword, but it's a longsword. And I was like, I have that, and I also have a shirt of mail, a hauberk, and that was also crafted by the war elves, and that was taken from me, and my helm. All of that is in their possession, Lord. And he goes, I see. And so he whispers to his advisor, and the advisor whispers to him, and the advisor walks down past me, and he walks over to Jess, and he starts whispering to her. She whispers to him, and I'm just standing there, handcuffed, like, oh God, what's going to happen? And so Jess walks up, and she goes right up to the only lord of this tribunal, and Barry is out of game, going, I thought this was a tribunal. Like, there's only one of them. Like, this is kangaroo court. This is a kangaroo court. Like, there should be 3 elven lords. That's how the tribunal deals with matters such as this. All right, Jen. I'll see you later. And so Barry's calling out a kangaroo court, and Rob's like, are you saying this in character too? He's like, yeah, I'm saying it. I'll say it. Like, this is a kangaroo court. Like, there's no reason why, like, any of this should be happening. Like, this trial, this is a mistrial. There's 1 out of 3. He can't be sole arbiter of justice. There needs to be the other 2 to debate him on the merits of this case. And then Jess walks up to the Lord, and she hands him or shows him, like, the sword, the belt, and my shirt of mail. And so the elven lord turns back to me, and he's like, I see you do have elven made weapons and arms. And that belt buckle also is of David Bowie's house. But I don't think that like, is there any other evidence that you have? Like, just because you have that doesn't, like, I can't simply just take your word for it. You could have killed one of his kin and taken it. And I'm like, that's all I've got. Like, I'm of the I'm of the line of Ulrich. I'm of the line of David. Like, I'm heir to to House Bowie, and I'm heir to territories for the War Elves by my mother. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. And he's like, well, maybe if your mother is part of the Mirren and the Killiorn, which is the War Elves' name. I'm like, yes, my lord. And he goes, well, maybe we could call for her and have her come here to stand as a witness to your testimony. And I'm like, I can't. She can't. And he's like, well, why not? I'm like, she died in the flight of the Mirren. And that's basically what happened. Is my father, when he was riding back, the enemy that he had been defeated by followed him, and they just laid waste to this area on the eaves of the forest, and that's where my mother and me and small like there was a few small settlements, and this is back when like again this is like 50, 60 years prior to this moment. Like the the whole that whole area of the forest was just wiped out. And so my mother was killed, a lot of the elves were killed, and my father, grandfather, me, and a few stragglers were able to flee. And that's why we flew westwards, and that's why it's called the flight of the Miran. And he's like, "Oh, my condolences. So you have no witnesses or anybody that can testify on your behalf?" And I'm like, my grandfather was supposedly coming here with my father, and that's it. And I haven't heard from him since. And he's like, "Well, we'll wait for them." And I'm like, "Wait, what?" He's like, "We'll wait for him. Your father's half elven, and he is gifted with long life, and your grandfather is of the elves, and he will live until his end, either by blade or by the end of this world." And Barry just keeps chanting out, "This is kangaroo court." And as soon as he hears that, he goes, "Wait, what?" And Rob's like, "Yeah, you guys are going to be confined to a jail cell for however long it takes for Ben or David Bowie to come before the tribunal to testify." And we're like, "Oh fuck, that could be years. Both of them could die. We could be stuck in jail for decades." And Barry is a human wizard who's like 23, 23, 24. He's if they finally let us go, like in like 40 years from now, when like my grandfather finally comes by and he's like, "Well, I'm back from the war. I've come back to take up being part of the tribunal." Oh shit, my grandson's been stuck in prison. Who's that old fuck next to him? And it's like, that's my companion that came with me on this adventure, you know. Like he has two books that help stop the evil, possibly. We don't know. But yeah, we've been stuck in here for like 40 years. Christ, I don't even think my character would be coherent at that point. He'd probably be absolutely insane, scratching the walls, tally marks all over the place, counting down the days. And so we get locked up. And Jess is kind of smug. She's like, "Yep, told you." Of course, we could have shown him the books you two were carrying, your contraband. And I'm like, "Ma'am, lady, please. Like, we're having a rough time. Like, it could be years." And she's like, "Well, that's the way of the land here." I'm like, "I figured as much. I mean, I did live here for a few years. I know a little bit about this, like these regions, but not fully." And so it just came down to me and Barry again. Like, what are we gonna do? Like, what the fuck are we gonna do, Barry? And Barry's like, "Well, if I remember correctly, when it comes to the tribunal, like we could argue for a phone call." And I'm like, "Barry, this ain't no time to joke." And he's like, "No, I'm not talking out of character. I'm talking in character. We can send a letter or something, like demand them to give us a letter or a rider to send out word. Like, if these guys are isolationists, they're not going to tell anybody about you or me. But if we demand to have a messenger go to your grandfather's house and realm here in the woods, Maybe like somebody there will get the message out and start looking. Maybe your grandfather's, I don't know, recovering from the Battle of Four Rivers. Like maybe like your father's there with him and they're trying to rally up men and support from the Mirren elves. Who, like, the gray elves will probably fight with him. They're both gray elves. Like your father's half gray elf, but your grandfather's a full gray elf. Maybe that's what they're doing. I'm like, that could work, but I'm more concerned about what's going on with the tribunal. And Barry's like, what? You mean the fact that it was only one? I'm like, yeah, that's kind of suspicious. And so Barry and me concocted a plan. And the plan was this. We were going to we were basically going to practically call out a mistrial. Like, it was a mistrial and that they're wrongfully imprisoning us without all three heads of the tribunal being there. On top of that, if I can prove my claim by sending somebody from my grandfather's house here who would know me from the time that I was a child, that'd be evidence. That'd be a good test. That'd be testimony in my defense. And then my name and my word would be cleared, and I'd be able to vouch for Barry and what's been going on since then. Because they didn't even allow me to explain the events that have been happening since like the campaign started. Like, it was just a rushed trial. And so we started doing that and doing that and again and again and again for like a week, when like, because they left us down in a fucking jail cell, like, I don't know where, but it's one of the deepest, darkest dungeons I've ever fucking seen. And like, the only time we would see somebody was to leave us like our daily meal, and we'd only get one meal a day. And so every day, like, we just yell and foam at the goddamn mouths, being like, "This is a kangaroo court. Like, we need representation. Like we mistrial. This is a goddamn mistrial, objection, and whatnot." And the guards just finally, after like a week and a half, just finally said, "You know what? They've been screaming and like yelling their lungs out the last week and a half. And every time we go there with food, they keep saying the same fucking thing. Bring them out." And they tell the head of the tribunal, and so he's like, "Yep, I'll allow it." And so they bring us back out, and they're like, "All right, what the fuck are you two yelling about?" And that's when I was like, I demand a letter or message be sent to my grandfather's house. If somebody there of my if my grandfather's kin is still alive and kicking and still there, they should be able to come here or send you a letter in response telling you that I am who I say I am. He's like, "All right, I'll grant that." And I said, "Also," and Barry chimed in on this too, "we shouldn't be in a prison cell." And he's like, "Well, why not?" "Because there's only one out of the tribunal. There's no wards, there's no other members of the house. Like, the other two houses aren't here. You're the only one deciding, which means that you are taking on the full responsibility without having anybody else to deliberate this. And that's not how that's not how the tribunal works. We should be allowed to be under house arrest, or and then Barry's like, or have free reign over the city, but have chaperones. Yeah, chaperones. We should be chaperoned around the city, being under watch. Like, we should be under city arrest." And so the elf, like, Rob's looking at it and he's looking at us. And then Jess is just shaking her head because she's just like, nah, this ain't gonna work. This ain't gonna work. And so he's like, all right, I'm gonna need persuasion checks from both of you. And this is a fucking do or die moment. And my character did not have persuasion, so I had to use my charisma, and my charisma was like a +1. So I have to roll with a +1, and Barry doesn't have persuasion, but he has a +2 in charisma. So we're both rolling like charisma checks instead of like skill checks, and so we roll, and I fuck up, but Barry just barely succeeds. Like I think he rolled one under, or he was just on like exactly on the number needed, and the DM allowed it. He's like, like you guys did have a pretty convincing argument. I won't grant you full access to the city, but lodgings will be made for you, and you'll be allowed to stay there. And I will send out 2 riders. 2 riders only. And they will go to whatever members that you give them and whatever letters you give them. And it has to be done by the end of the day. I'm like, thank you, my lord. And I turn around, and Barry's like, so who are we going to send the letters to? And I was like, I have no fucking clue. And he's like, what? I'm like, I haven't been around here since I was like 6 or 7 goddamn years old. I don't know the rest of my extended family. He's like, well, he's like, fuck. And then he starts thinking, he's like, I roll a knowledge nobility check. And so he rolled a knowledge nobility check, and he's like, we could write to your great aunt, or oh no, because David Bowie's your grandfather's wife's dead. We could write to his brother. That's who we could write to. We could write to we could write to David Bowie's brother, and we could write to your great aunt, or anybody else that might come into my head. But those are the 2 that I can think of. And I'm like, all right, well, what are their names? And where do they live? He's like, the location doesn't have to matter. If you just give those names, like, I'm sure these guys will know where they live, or they'll find a way. I'm like, all right, well, give me their names, and we'll walk over and we'll give them their names. So I gave him the names of my character's great aunt and David Bowie's brother. And the messengers fucking wrapped up the scrolls, put them into cases, hopped onto horses, and they left. And then we're immediately we're not handcuffed, but we're guided by Jess and the rest of this border patrol, because since they're the ones who caught us, the head of the tribunal is like, you know what? Since you guys have been guarding them this whole time, you guys can continue guarding them. Have a nice day. And so Jess is kind of miffed because she's part of Border Patrol and she wants to be out fighting the good fight. And we get to a nice little house, nice little cottage right next to a babbling brook, and it's kind of off the beaten path outside of this settlement, like the city, but it's not too far away to where like we could make a mad dash for the woods and just disappear. And oh my god, sweet relief. We're not stuck in jail cells. Each of us have our own bed in our own separate rooms. We're able to eat whatever we want. Like, we're not eating gruel or slices of cheese. Like, just having the time of our life with this free reign, thanks to Barry and his charisma check roll. And so everything's going smoothly, and Jess is just shaking her head angrily just scowling at us the whole time, and we're like, "What's wrong?" Like we're not bad guys. Like we're not spies. We're not trying to do anything. Like we told you what happened to us, and you didn't even tell him. And then Barry's trying to puff up his chest because, again, he has no social skills whatsoever. He's like, "Yeah, you're talking to the heir to House Bowie right over here. Well, in line, like part of the line of Ulrich." And I'm like, "Barry, please shut up about that. Like, I don't need people. Like, people should not be knowing about my lineage." And he's like, "Sorry, it's just like she should show you some respect. Like, you're of noble houses. You're a noble." And Jess is like, "Yeah, and so am I. Like, that doesn't fucking matter. Plus, even if he is of those noble bloodlines, he could be a spy now. He could have betrayed us. Like, I'm stuck out here. I'm stuck here guarding two idiots while the rest of my kin are dying on the borders trying to keep our land safe." And uh, it just became a party fight, just an argument, just both of us drinking. Like we had both had a little too much wine, but we were just enjoying our vacation away from a prison cell, a damp cold dungeon. And she was rightfully annoyed. She was justified in her anger towards us. Like we had pulled it's just like in real world court cases where somebody is able to bullshit their way out of being guilty. Like, granted, we weren't guilty of anything except for trespassing. And we had a valid reason for trespassing, which is we were lost, wounded, and we were being chased by a roaming band of orcs on wargs. So it was either fucking get eaten and killed by them or face the consequences of trespassing. And the only evidence they had of us being spies is the fucking books Barry grabbed. So yeah, like shitty situation, and she's justified in being angry that two possible spies are now semi-free, and there is a chance of them overpowering the six border guards with like like chairs or grabbing their swords off them and disarming them and then killing them and fleeing, which could just damn the whole kingdom because we're at the heart of the kingdom. We know where we're going. Once we start running away from there, we'll have an estimation of how far into the forest this settlement is. And that's when we started asking her questions like, where's the other tribunal members? Like, why isn't, like, if my grandfather isn't alive and well, where's his ward and where's the other house? And so she told us that when they called out like a week ago for the rest of the tribunal to come, the ward was killed. Like my grandfather's ward was killed en route, and the other house has been silent for months. And nobody knows why. And every time they go there, they just kind of hand wave it. Like, "Oh, everything's fine. Just we're just kind of being isolationist right now. Sorry for the blackout of communication. How are you doing?" Like really suspicious. But that house is known for being aloof, and so they're not really pushing it as much as they should. And Jess thinks that they should press it, but the rest of the border patrol and the rest of the rangers and druids don't want to do anything about it because they're so stretched thin. And so we're now dealing with, not only are we dealing with two evil books or two books that contain evil knowledge, a trial that's being made against me and Barry for being possible spies. The fact that there's a great war going on there's the siege that I was supposed to help lift is still going strong. Now there's infighting amongst the elven house, the three elven houses, and one of them has gone quiet. One of them are being pricks to me and Barry, and my grandfather may be alive or dead, but nobody knows. And the ward that was going to be here that might have known me uh, is dead. Lovely. And so we spent about 2 weeks sitting on house arrest, and we actually requested to get out of the house like a few times during that, and they just kept being denied. Like, nope, can't leave the house. You can't leave the house. You can stay in the on the property line per se, like the area, like like about 50 yards. Uh, no, about 10 yards around the house. Like you can walk through the gardens and stuff like that, but that's it. You can enjoy the babbling brook, but other than that, no, you can't leave. So we're like, great. And after like this 2 weeks of waiting, we finally get word. Uh, my grandfather, like David Bowie's father, brother, dead. He was slain like 2 months prior, and his family is completely torn up over it, and his wife wants nothing to do with the messages because the messenger came to their hold and was like, I have word from one of David Bowie's kin, and it's for your husband. And she's like, I don't want to hear anything about it because she's still heartbroken over it. And so there goes one messenger. The messenger's like, yeah, she sent me back and she didn't even want to read the letter. So I'm like, oh, thanks a lot. And then my great aunt responds, and she's like, I don't know who the fuck you're talking about at all, but I will send somebody in my stead to examine him because David Bowie has very defining features, and my father has defining features because he's of the line of Ulrich. And not a lot of elves know about the intricacies of this. Uh, my grandfather's house knows, and some of the exiled gray elves know of it, which is I have gray eyes, uh, which is a defining feature of my lineage, and that's about it. That's the only thing that you can tell about me that makes me part of the line of Ulrich. They are the only humans to have gray eye color, and it's a very deep steel I think Rob described it as like a battle steel, like a battleship gray, like a very dark gray. But it's still gray. Like you're not gonna. It's not like nearing black or anything. And that's the only characteristic of my like physical appearance. And so I'm like, great. I She's sending somebody who I don't know that may let that probably like the only good news of it is like, oh, thank God, like my grandfather's whole like kingdom knows like about that, like to some extent, like the noble families definitely know. And if she's sending a noble, then awesome. He'll hit she or he will point out and go, yep, that's him, all right. He's got gray eyes. But who's to say they're not going to die on the way here? And the messenger's like, yep, they said that they were going to leave like 4 or 5 days ago, and it took me a week to get back. So you got about another 3 or 4 days of waiting. And we're like, that's fine by us. Like, this is the best news we've heard in weeks. And like over that time, we had been talking to Jess, explaining everything to her. Like, and we still trying to break through just break through and try and tell her our side of the story so she'd understand. And she's still steadfast and pissed off that she's stuck here guarding us. And we're like, well, in a couple days, my aunt's advisor or diplomat's going to be here, and this whole thing's going to be cleared up, and then you can go back to your business. And so 4 or 5 days go by, and the diplomat comes, but he doesn't come to check us out at the house. No, we have to go to the trial. And so we go before them, and I shit you not, Rob goes, yeah, you walk in, like you're not handcuffed or anything, but you walk in and the guards are beside you as always. And as you're walking closer, you see somebody sitting in the second seat to the left of the lord of the tribunal. It's David fucking Bowie. My grandfather's back. And he immediately, upon seeing me, hops out of his seat, runs down the steps, and he just hugs me. He's like, "Oh my God, I thought you were dead. Like your father and I just pushed through the enemy ranks when they besieged us and broke through, and we just barely made it out." And I'm like, "Where's my father? Where's Ben Orr?" And he's like, "He's alive, but he's over the mountains, and he's talking to the dwarves, and he's talking to the war elves, the Killiorn, and he's requesting aid from them as well, because we're in some bad straits right now." And I'm like, "Well, how bad is it?" He's like, "Well, the reason why your aunt got the message was because I went to her to ask for help for men. I need men because the siege is still going strong in Prewa, and we need to lift that siege. And everybody, my sister, his sister-in-law, like my sister wants nothing to do with the war because my brother's dead because of it. And we've just been straggling around trying to gather as many men as possible." And I'm like, "Well, how many men do you have?" He's like, "Probably 3,000, 4,000 tops. Like, that's as many men as I could get from all of my bannermen, because they've just been holding the line here in the like in the fatherland. Like, that's like this war has just been ravaging these lands." And I'm like, "Well, how many do you think father will get when he gets back?" He's like, "We still have the 1,000 that like you ordered to stay behind in the cold pass for the dwarves, and the dwarves owe you, but you'd have to go before the dwarves and speak to them yourselves because you're the one who made the pact, and they'll honor it only because of you." And I'm like, "Fuck." And then the tribunal and everybody around us is just sitting there like waiting, and my grandfather, like David Bowie, turns around and goes, "Yep, he's my grandson. Like, release him. Like, release him and his companion. What's your name?" And he's like, "Thaddeus Stormwind." He's like, "Release Thaddeus. Both of them are freed, and they're under my protection. Bring him his arms and armor." And I'm like, "Ah, yes, freedom. We are freed. Thank God, David Bowie. Oh, you're a godsend. God, you're a godsend. Thank God you're here." And he's like, "Yeah, well, don't celebrate just yet, because you're coming with me, and we have to go see the other noble house because they haven't been around, and I'm getting suspicious about what's going on." And I'm like, "Well, I have an idea." And I turn around, and Jess's character is arguing with the rest of her company, her group, because of the fact that like we're not spies. And I walk over and I apologize to her for like the arguing we'd been having over the course of the past few weeks. And I'm like, to make amends, would you like to join us? Like you and your band of merry men, would you like to join us on our way back? Like my grandfather has stated that like we have to go and talk to this other noble house, the one that you were mentioning that were aloof and weren't saying anything. Do you want to come with us? And she's kind of apprehensive to it. And like Barry comes over and he's like, you're you're probably a good fighter. You've been fighting on the border for however many years. Like we could use an extra hand. Lord knows I can't. Plus Surian's shoulders all fucked up still from twisting and ruining and like just wrecking that wound of his. So he's not up to snuff right now. So we're gonna need a few good able bodies to help us fight if we get caught in a fight. And so Jess is looking to her group, and then she's looking at us, and so she starts apologizing to us because she's like, I'm kind like the captain's been arguing with me like constantly. Like you got like just something about you guys wasn't something that spies would do, and I'm sorry for being so fucking paranoid, but it's like, can you blame me? And so she wanted to make it up to us, and we wanted to make it up to her, and so we joined up. So it's now me, Barry, and Jess, and we're all of us, and we have 5 other elves with us alongside David Bowie, and I'm all equipped. We gather some supplies. So now we're all back on track, and now it's time to head off to the other house and see what the fuck's going on. And that's probably where I'm going to stop for this part because there's a lot more that happens. But I will state what's been going on for Will and Eric, their dwarf fighter and halfling rogue, and I'll talk about what's going on with Jared and Mitch's characters. So Jared and Mitch's characters first. So they had lifted the siege off of that fort in the eastern fringe, and they had gotten renowned for that. And they were continuing their crusade, pushing through, fighting, pushing back the enemy. And what they had done was they had routed an enemy force that was heading towards the capital. Like, and it was an insane victory, like a 10-1. And later on, as we get towards when we finally when we meet up with them in passing, me, Jess, Barry, Will, and Eric. Well, yeah, me, Jess, Barry, Eric, and Will hear about this, and we actually witnessed the parade for this event, which is the Blood River, or the Battle of Bloody River, which is basically while they were crossing one of the only ways into the kingdom, and this is like a natural border for the kingdom. Jared's character led a death charge straight into the ranks. Like they were completely battered and wounded, and when they saw that this enemy was going to push through, they were like, we're going to like there's no way we're going to be able to like reach our own men and warn them of this attack. So we're just going to charge in and just do as much damage as possible, and we'll send out maybe 1 or 2 riders with with fresh horses. And so they did that, and just by sheer luck and skill, Jared and Mitch's characters with the rest of their army were able to smash through an army like a force 10 times their size and completely just rout it. Welcome back, Sten. And so Jared and Mitch routed this massive army, completely just scattered it to the countryside. And so once that was done, Jared ordered that to break up the army that he had and then track down the stragglers and kill them, because he was going full on like 40k attitude, like spare none of the enemy. Like he was going hardcore lawful good. Now that's what was happening with Mitch and Jared's characters while we were dealing with this whole Elven Tribunal. Now you might be wondering, because I've in this video, in this telling, I have brought up everybody except for Will and Eric's characters. And there's a reason for that. So when they started their characters, they were asked, where do you guys want to start? Because Will is a mercenary. He's of the his name is Thordar Ironstone, and he's part of the Ironstone clan. Now, the Ironstone clan are a wandering dwarven clan. Their home it's generic Hobbit backstory. They lived in the Iron Mountain, which is north of the Miran Forest. They were trading with the Northerners, like the northern fringes of the Middle Kingdoms. And during one of the Goblin Wars, they were being besieged, and somehow they were driven out from the inside. And none of the dwarves know exactly what kind of terrible wrath or foe appeared within the mountain, but it was it was strong enough to just literally wipe out most of their army that was sitting inside. And so this is like a century or so prior to Will being born, and so he's been wandering the land with his clansmen, and he has just become a mercenary for hire. And Eric's character, Niles, is a rogue. Like, he is the epitome of a thief slash trickster slash pickpocketer, smooth talker. He's like a Han Solo type. And in one of the cities, before like the war finally reached to it, Will was walking through the city, and he saw in one of the alleyways Eric getting roughed up by two guys that he had cheated out of money in a game of cards. And so Will saved him, beat the two guys just with his bare hands, drove them off. They ran off, and Eric was like, "I owe you my life for that, man. Like, they were gonna kill me." And so both of them are best friends ever since. And they've been friends for like the last 4 or 5 years. Well, they were asked, where do you want to start off? They chose Prewa. And so for this entire game thus far, like the last 3-4 weeks of sessions that we had been playing, they've been stuck in a besieged city. And so what Will's been doing is he's been helping fortify the walls. He's been helping keep the walls in check. He's been helping maintain and inspect weapons to make sure. He's been helping train because they're down to women and children and elderly folk. Like, every person in Prewa is now being rallied and trained to fight, because they don't know when the siege is going to finally be broke. Like, if it ever will be broken. And every so often, the enemy tries to break through or scale the walls. And so it's just a constant it's a war of attrition. And so Will's been trying to help train the peasants. What's Eric been doing? Well, Eric is a halfling. He's a thief. He's been smuggling messages out for my kinsmen. And that's how the message got out. Eric has been sneaking out, traveling as far as he can on foot, past the enemy lines, gone behind enemy lines. And then once he's gotten safely out of there, he's traveled to the nearest town that's safe, that hasn't been attacked, and bribed and persuaded and smooth talked people into riding out with the message. And then he's stayed there for a little he stayed there for a few days until the message was passed off to another rider, and then they've given him information. So he's basically been sneaking in and out of the siege line, passing information to and from the higher ups and the commanders. And he's also been smuggling in like small amounts of supplies. So maybe a few bags of potatoes here and there. He's been going into the enemy camp and counting out like the numbers, what kind of siege equipment they have, how far back are their lines, what kind of like soldiers are they, like are they experienced, do they have trolls and ogres, like so he's been doing a lot of reconnaissance. And so during this whole time those two have just been stuck in a city for like the last 3-4 weeks. And so that's what's been going on up to this point, and it's probably where I'm going to end leave off now because I think I've been rambling for 3.5 hours. I think it's been 3.5 hours. It's been a while, but thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Sten. Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Tom. I'm glad to hear from you, buddy. Uh, I'll probably do another one of these, probably around Thursday. Because today's Sunday. Yeah, around Thursday, I'll probably pick up where I left off. It's probably going to be like a five. I'd say a 5 part. Like I'll probably speed because this is where like I got to go into the detail as to how we all met. But once that's done, then I can start like shortening like certain battles and events because again, it's a very army focused. But you guys have a wonderful night. Uh, like I said, I'll be here Thursday, Friday the latest to talk about all the next part of this. And it's gonna save my phone memory instead of posting 20-minute segments. And yeah, I'll see you guys then.